Okie dokie. So, good morning. We've got a couple more FA Cup third round matches today. I'm looking forward to the Nottingham Forest Arsenal game at lunchtime. I think I'm really looking forward to that. Arsenal are wearing a special kit in response to basically it's a kit designed to highlight the issues with knife crime in Greater London. So Arsenal are wearing a one-off kit for this game. Much like Crystal Palace yesterday, we're wearing an anniversary kit, being one of the first teams ever to play in the FA Cup 150 years ago. So we're seeing some one-off kits, which are really interesting to see. Also, the Novak Djokovic situation is gaining traction over in Australia in regards to his visa application and being held in a quarantine hotel. His lawyers are arguing he's already had COVID, which means he shouldn't need a vaccination, therefore he should be vaccination exempt. The federal government have overruled the state government of the state of Victoria, so it's looking likely Novak Djokovic will not be defending his Australian Open title. But this does set a precedent for international sports stars. And, we've got the Winter Olympics coming up in just over a month and a half's time. We already know the NHL have pulled their players out from the ice hockey competition. How many more athletes will not go to the Beijing Winter Olympics? The quarantine period's another thing. If you test positive over there, that's going to prove massive headaches, I believe, for a whole host of athletes and nations. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Winter Olympics pulls out. There's also a political boycott from nations withdrawing their ambassadors and not sending representatives to the Winter Olympics. So there's a whole host of political things going on at the side there with the Winter Olympics. And the Novak Djokovic situation is posing a lot of questions when it comes to international sport. Bearing in mind, we've obviously got the World Rugby League World Cup later this year, the World Cup in Qatar later this year. We've got the European Nations League games in the summer. So there's a lot of big international tournaments as well that could be impacted by what happens with Novak Djokovic, because it be leading a precedent. Who's more likely to miss the World Cup, Italy or Portugal? We'll have to see who wins their playoffs at the end of the day. I think Italy, going into this qualifying tournament, the run of form they've been on over the last couple of years under Roberto Mancini as manager and winning the Euros, it will be a massive loss if they're not at the World Cup. Portugal, they didn't look great at the Euros. They were very flat at the Euros. While Ronaldo did score a lot of goals, a lot of them were from the penalty spot. From open play, they didn't look very threatening. They're a team in transition. That one is up in the air. It all depends on how the playoffs go for the World Cup qualifiers. There's a lot of teams that are going to miss out that would have been at World Cups in the past. And all told, is it a big loss that neither side are there? I mean, Italy could say there's a Euros hangover affecting their qualification campaign. Portugal, they just weren't very good at the Euros. There was a lot of issues with Portugal at the Euros that I think were highlighted by the fact that they really struggled. They didn't create a lot. They looked very flat. They had no energy to their sides. Players underperformed. So on that one, it's a difficult one. I think Italy, have enough talent and quality to get to the World Cup. They like doing it the hard way. They've done it this way before. Before World Cup '98, they went into a playoff against the Russians, I seem to remember. So Italy have done it the hard way to get to the World Cup before. And they've missed out a couple of times in recent tournaments as well. So they have a very talented squad, though. I think they're too talented not to go. Portugal, Ronaldo, it's his ego. There is a good supporting cast with Portugal. It's just getting those pieces to work together. They look like a team of individuals at the Euros. They didn't play very well, let's be honest. But their entire group didn't play very well. The Hungarians, I think, were the team that should have got out of that group. The group of death really was. Every team was done by the second round. The Germans didn't play well. The French didn't play well. The Hungarians played a level above themselves. They haven't qualified for the World Cup. So it's going to be interesting to see who makes it out of those two. But there's a whole host of other nations as well that have got to go through the playoff qualification phase, who are regular World Cup, performers. So there's going to be some big nations that miss out from this year's tournament. But again, we're like, what, 11 months away, 10 and a half months away from the tournament kicking off. Um, the condensed European schedule is already having an impact. I've noticed far more injuries this season for teams. Um, so many teams are having injury problems more than normal. Uh, so the disrupted schedule we've had pretty much for the last 2 years is definitely having an impact on player welfare. I can definitely state that for a matter of fact. Um, the I was looking back at some of my FA Cup match reviews, and I think it was the Chesterfield Salford City game. There were 17 players unavailable for both sides put together. That's 17 players out injured. That's not including COVID tests. That's just injured players for two squads, and it and that was in the second round. That was a month ago. So yeah, I've noticed there's more injuries for players in the last 18 months. So that's something to bear in mind. It's going to be interesting to see how, again, what strength side Arsenal put out today, for example. Great history in this competition. They won it a couple of years ago against Chelsea in the final. So it'd be interesting to see again, how many changes Arsenal and Nottingham Forest make. It'd be interesting to see, how many changes. Bear in mind, there's no replays from the third round this year onwards. So, you know, Barrow versus Ipswich Town could be the last FA Cup replay we possibly ever see. They may decide to scrap replays altogether from the first round proper all the way through. So we may never see FA Cup replays again. And there is a call with the World Cup when it is and the fixture congestion. We may see replays disappear from the FA Cup, which will be a massive loss for those smaller clubs with smaller budgets where the FA Cup is a big money maker for them. So football, it doesn't matter if it's international football like Italy or Portugal. Are they going to make the World Cup or not? Or we're talking about domestic cup competitions. So no replays from the third round onwards this year, and that's partly to do with this World Cup, with the fixture congestion. And now we're looking at all these COVID and weather cancellations. Weather happens, okay, bad weather happens, it cancels games. But the amount of COVID cancellations, the amount of games lost because of the COVID pandemic this season with this third wave, it's going to become a fixturing headache later on in the season when these games get penciled back into the schedule. There are some teams with so many games in hand in various leagues. So Burnley, for example, and Newcastle had a lot of games cancelled. Just for an example, Manchester United, Tottenham, they have a lot of games in hand around the teams around them. The FA has been very, very keen to get every single third round tie played. That is interesting. And looking at issues with squad depth that teams have had, with Liverpool, for example, having their League Cup match postponed, their first semi-final, first leg postponed against Arsenal. What strength side are Liverpool going to put out this weekend? I haven't seen all the results. I know Newcastle lost to Cambridge United at home 1-0 yesterday. But here's the thing. Newcastle had a very disrupted last couple of weeks. Not a lot of games played, a lot of games postponed because of COVID. And people go, they're the wealthiest club in the world. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you haven't had that match fitness, and we saw it yesterday in the Palace Millwall game, I think both sides looked a little bit off the boil. It wasn't a blood and thunder game like I expected. It wasn't a dirty game. The fans were lobbing missiles, but the players just didn't look 100% match fit, if that makes sense. Palace deserved the win for their second half performance, but it did look a little bit off the ball. It wasn't a lot of intensity, it wasn't as much intensity, should I say, as I expected. I expected a little bit more blood and thunder, being it a local derby and all that, and South London bragging rights for the day. Same with the Swindon Town Man City game. There was a lot of changes with the Man City lineup. That lacked a bit of intensity. I think Swindon were too nice. So I've noticed in the two games I've seen in the FA Cup in this third round, intensity's been lacking a little bit. And I do think the amount of cancellations for games, of games and such, are having an impact. Do I think PSG will win the Champions League? I hope not. I hope someone else does. And this is where I think PSG and the quality of league they play in is having an impact. Because they do go missing in those big games, those big pressure games. They've come up short multiple times in the Champions League. Only one French team has ever won the Champions League, and that's Marseille. The French clubs do struggle in Europe, and I think that's indicative of the quality of league they play in. And that is a problem when PSG have basically bought the league. They've got to be really poor one season for them not to win the league. And Lille last year proved that you didn't need a lot of money to win. And we're looking at the UEFA coefficient. And Portugal were bumped up above the French league for a few months when it came to the coefficient. And it comes down to Europa League qualifying and Conference League qualifying and Champions League qualifying, when those clubs have to go to the qualifying round, get to the group stage proper. So the French league is is not as competitive as it should be. Apart from PSG, the last French side or French base side to make the Champions League final was Monaco, the better part of 2 decades ago. So French clubs in the European club competitions don't have the glittering history of the German, the Italian, the Spanish, and the British clubs, for example, when it comes to winning European trophies, and that is indicative of the quality of their league. And then you've got to look at French sports and how people consume their sport and what sports they passionately follow. And it's a more, you look at the pie chart, when you break it down, it's a more even spread of fans watching French sports, whereas the majority of TV revenue over here in the UK, for example, goes to English football. So that the sports TV makeup and the sports fandom is very interesting in France, which I think doesn't also help the strength of their league. Juventus or PSG, who will go through. Again, I'm saying this quite calmly. With what's going on with Juventus, I hope PSG do beat them a little bit with the European Super League and their creative accounting. So Juventus are going into this knockout stage of the Champions League on the backdrop of scandal. PSG, yay, they win the French league most seasons, but other than that, they fall flat in the Champions League when it comes to big pressure games. And that will then heap further pressure on Pochettino as a manager. I think he's in a catch-22 because he's expected to win the league every season and didn't win it last season. He won the French Cup, but this season, yeah, it's a different season. He's got Messi in there now. Great, you've signed a player who's going to retire in a couple of years for a free, but on stupid wages. This is, I think, where football's lost its way a little bit. Is the salaries are just too much, far too much in paying player salaries now. It's got to ridiculous levels. If I'm being brutally honest, when it comes to player salaries and the transfers, it's almost obscene. But this is the modern day, I suppose. I think the last 30 years, there's too much money in the game, and it's not getting to the right levels of the game. Juventus, PSG, Juventus, they don't have as great a history in this competition as they would like. Other Italian clubs have had better success in Europe than Juventus, which is interesting. But Juventus and PSG, 2 clubs you've got to love to hate. I'm not going to lie, I know you're a Juventus fan, but it's 2 clubs you have to love to hate. And it's getting very interesting in Italy now with the league being far more competitive, which is a positive for the sport. We're seeing a shift in the power in Spanish football now, and I do think at some point, I mean, the other clubs in the French top division have said, look, we need to be more top 2 French divisions have said, look, we need to be more financially, responsible. Even Monaco, who've got a wealthy owner, are saying, look, we need to, live within our means as a club. And what is also pretty damning of French football is the best French players don't play in France. A lot of the best French players play overseas, so that tells you all you need to know about the state of French football. Is, don't get me wrong, it's a talent production line. Is French football? There's a reason why they won 2 World Cups in my lifetime. But they are a production line of talent, no doubt on that. and they've always had great players throughout their history. There's no denying that France does produce great athletes, great sportsmen in a variety of sports, but football and rugby union, they produce some of the most skillful, technically capable players I've ever seen. However, they have a tendency to implode on themselves. And I say this: rugby union is far more competitive as a domestic league than football because every team has money in the French rugby union setup. The top two divisions is just money's getting thrown around like it's going out of fashion for rugby union terms. So it's a far more competitive system. Whereas in football, it's 19 clubs being financially responsible, one club just wanting to, there's something not right there. And it's a shame because it impacts the quality that you see at the end of the day. And, it does have a negative impact on the sport. It does. What happens when Mbappe and Neymar want to win the Champions League? They're going to want to leave. That's the problem. That's the problem of trying to keep these superstars happy. Is if they don't win the Champions, it's like Man City, they've never won. They've only got to one final. Yeah, again, it's trying to you know what it money doesn't necessarily buy you success. It doesn't necessarily buy you success at all. It's how you spend the money and that's how you build the team together and put the pieces together and you know uh, get the starting 11 to gel together. It, just because you have a team of superstars doesn't mean you're going to win anything. And I can look at other sports where they've got these superstar teams put together and they come up short because they can't gel as a team. So you might have individual talent, but unless it works together as a unit, it's irrelevant what you put together. Because hard work and grit, determination, teamwork will always out trump, individual talent. I personally believe if you work together as a unit of 11 players, that start plus the bench plus the wider squad, you're going to be more successful um, than a team of individuals. So let's have a look at some bits and pieces in the old notebook. Right, so Nottingham Forest Arsenal is the next game in the FA Cup today. Really looking forward to that. Not going to lie, I'm actually thoroughly looking forward to that. If I'm brutally honest, I think that's going to be a very very good game. Arsenal, the away team. It'll be interesting to see again how many changes are made for both sides. Considering that Arsenal now had a delayed League Cup semi-final first leg, they've got to prep for next week. It's going to be interesting to see how Mikel Arteta rotates the squad. In my opinion, there's going to be some squad rotation there. It'll be nice to see Arsenal put the strongest possible team on the field. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see also if Nottingham Forest put their strongest possible team on the field. Considering that they are trying to get out the Championship, make the playoffs, get promotion back to the Premier League, and so that's going to be a very interesting matchup, I think, for the lunchtime kickoff. I don't know what the weather conditions are like in the East Midlands today. To be fair, I mean we've had a lot of rain, a fair bit of snow as well further north. So the weather conditions, much like yesterday with the Palace Millwall game, could have an impact on the pace of the game, how the playing surface will hold up. It's going to be interesting to see how that all, plays out at the City ground. How it holds, how the playing surface holds up. It's a pretty decent surface these days at Forest's ground, at the City ground. But it'll be interesting to see, if overnight, it has been cold overnight. It's going to be. I think it's going to be passing showers, so changeable weather conditions. But it'll be interesting to see how Arsenal set up as the away team, how strong a lineup they put out, and again, they've got this delayed League Cup semi-final, so they've got a midweek game coming up, and that's going to be interesting to see. Okay, do they target that game knowing Liverpool have got a lot of players out? Which do they target both trophies this season as a gateway to Europe? Because I don't think they've got quite enough in the league. Could this be a springboard to really get their season steamrolling again, pick up some points in the league as well? Could they use this as a confidence booster? Could we see some of their younger players get a run out today? Could that be to Forest's advantage? Having a more settled lineup. It's going to be a really interesting cup tie. Both sides have great history in the FA Cup. Arsenal under Wenger, I mean, crikey. I mean, how many FA Cups did Wenger win as a manager on his own? And Arteta has obviously won this competition as a manager as well, so he'll be very, very keen to try and win it again, and bring more silverware back to the Emirates. There's been a lack of silverware at the Emirates. 3 FA Cups since the Emirates was opened as a stadium, and that is it. They've won no other trophies. So they've come up short in so many competitions. It'll be nice for them, I think, with the history they have in the competition, and where they're at in the league. I think that could be a springboard to further success and attracting, more players or keeping more of their youth talent. Because Arsenal, I do believe, are in a decline at the moment, and that's not Mikel Arteta's fault. That's on ownership. That's on player development, scouting, etc., etc. So it's an interesting subplot to the matchup. Nottingham Forest, obviously, that they've been out of the Premier League now for over 20 years. You know, that in itself is a shame. I think a club their size and their history in the game and what they've done in the game, they should be in the Premier League. But obviously, times have been tough for Forest over the last 20 or so years. Okay, so Australia have not swept England for a 5-0 out. We got a draw in the 4th test. It's still a dismal Ashes display by England, but we've managed to bat out for a draw. We've held on. England clung on for a tense draw on the final day of the 4th test in Sydney. The tourists with 13 balls from safety when Jack Leach, Ed Steve Smith behind. Broad and James Anderson were basically there to stick it out. It's still not good enough on the cricket side of things. Let's just read the comment section. So we've just held on for a draw in the Ashes in the 4th test. It's not good enough. I think that the issue, I think, with England and the cricket, it's got to be captaincy, the vice captaincy, and the coaching setup and the selectors. There needs to be massive overhaul of the England cricket side because we've made a very average Australian side look world class. Just putting it out there, we have made a very average Australian side look like world beaters, which they are not. But it's telling that, 2 of the veteran players are the ones digging England out of trouble. That is a concern. I mean, Anderson and Broad. I mean, Anderson's got, I think this will be his last summer playing Test cricket. I think he'll retire at the end of this year. Stuart Broad, how many more years has he got in him as well? 2 or 3 at best, if he stays injury free and can keep up his bowling form. So after them, the bowling depth worries me. And the batting depth is clearly not good enough. And the captaincy is a concern. But I think the whole England and the ECB, the whole setup with English cricket's a mess and needs massive reform to fix a lot of the problems that have been lingering for quite some time in that regard. So we've held on for a draw, yay. Still not good enough. If I don't know where to start, but it's been a shambles for the fact that the build-up was so disruptive for both sides. The fact that this Ashes series is coming on the back of basically scandal has overshadowed, I believe, what's the FA Cup doing today? So today we have FA Cup. Scores. There are some interest. So Nottingham Forest Arsenal was the evening kickoff, I should I say, at 5:10. I believe the Luton Harrogate game might be the one on the old TV there. So that's going to be interesting. But there's some interesting cup ties today. None of them look like to be postponed yet. However, I think there's a minimum time frame where they have to postpone a game. So if Luton Harrogate, for example, is the early lunchtime kickoff, they would have, if it was going to be postponed, would be postponed now for fans turning up from Yorkshire. Um, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. There's a lot of teams missing players. As I say, injuries. I've noticed more injuries this season. And when they announce the lineups and say how many players are missing, how many players, are out, long-term injuries, it is starting to worry me. And when you've got managers coming out and discussing player welfare, like they have, and players saying, well, we have concerns about our welfare. And people, and then you've got the keyboard warriors saying, oh, but they're paid 60, 70, 80, 100 grand a week. They can put up and shut up. That, it's a misnomer. That I mean, where I work and I do have a full-time job, we do have a staff shortage. We are short of staff, and we have been short of staff since I started. Even before I started, there were staff shortages where I used to work. Um, there's been a few issues where I used to work before that. Massive staff shortages this summer. So, in a variety of industries, it doesn't matter what you do. There's going to be sickness. There's going to be staff shortages. And when it comes to professional sport, athlete welfare is key. Um, because their careers are very, very short in what they do. Yes, they're well compensated, and we could say overly compensated for their efforts. But when you've got key players involved with the PFA, like Jordan Henderson saying our welfare isn't being taken seriously, we are raising concerns with the union, we are raising concerns with the FA and the Premier League and the Football League, and we're saying that we do have concerns about squad depth, squad rules, limiting squad size, a whole range of issues. I think they're right. I think some of these injuries can be life changing that they have. Um, you know, and yeah, footballing careers like rugby union are perilously short. So it's going to be interesting to see how many players. Squad rotation is important. Um, as I say, Liverpool obviously had to delay their League Cup semi-final first leg against Arsenal because they ran out of players, and that shouldn't be happening with a club of Liverpool size not having enough players to field a team. And what we've seen with the English Super League Rugby League is if you don't have enough players to field a team, you forfeit the game 48-0, which I think is ridiculous. And then the club gets punished, which I think is ridiculous. It's like victim shaming. You know, the Super League is not dealing with the COVID pandemic anywhere near as well as let's say, the NRL in Australia. Rugby league in this country is in the shambles. And so punishing the side further, not only by telling them to forfeit, but oh, by the way, you're going to be fined and punished further, is with a sport that's got money issues as it is, that just heaps further financial pressure upon teams. It's like the carrot and stick incentive, except the stick is a lot bigger than the carrot. There's going to be further, and the carrot's further and further away. I think that's possibly the wrong way to go about it. But we were discussing yesterday. Questions came up about poor tackle technique in rugby union, rugby league, and saying, well, you should fine players for poor tackle technique when they injure themselves, and issue punishments, etc. And that's thinking outside the box, because player welfare is important, and we are looking into studies into concussion and regular injuries and how that affects physical and mental health and such like, and some players do have repetitive injury problems and have had to retire early because of chronic health issues in regards to the injuries they've suffered. So when you've got players and managers of a high profile like Bielsa at Leeds and Jordan Henderson, captain of Liverpool, saying we have concerns about the welfare of the playing group, I think the EFL and the Premier League and the FA have got to look at squad rules, the size of squads. I think they might have to suspend the under 19s, for example, competition and put those youth players into the full squad training. just to cover bases, because as a Blackburn fan, we had a game against Hull and it was called up at the last minute because the first team squad of Hull had multiple positive cases, and then at the last minute, the EFL said, "Oh, but you got your youth squad you can use," and the test results came back and we've got a problem there as well. So there is definitely a lot of issues at play. But I'll be interested to see how many of the lineups in the two games I'll be watching today, how many players are rested, how many players are out injured, and how that affects the starting lineups. Because we saw with Crystal Palace yesterday, they didn't look fluid, they didn't look settled because they had to make a load of changes. Man City, Swindon, Man City again made 6 changes to their starting lineup. Their bench was basically their youth team. And while they won the game 4-1, and Swindon did help them quite significantly in the first half, again, it didn't look overly fluid like the high-paced intensity you would expect from a Premier League club. And even a League Two side in Swindon playing an FA Cup third-round match where it is, you know, money on the line for Swindon. They were nearly bust 6 months ago. And that's another thing, is what the pandemic has exposed is, as I keep saying, that the bad financial governance in football. Shocking, financial mismanagement of the game. Shocking. And over the last year and a half, basically since I've lived where I'm living now, so basically resumption of play, basically, for the Premier League 2020, so a year and a half ago. I've basically been living here now for a year and a half. And in that year and a half, I've noticed a lot of things. I've noticed that we had the EFL debate between League One and League Two, and asking for a salary cap. The Championship saying you can't have one rule. When it came to the emergency money, we stick with our lower league colleagues. When it came to the Premier League and the EFL arguing about the bailout, said you can't have a separate bailout for us. It must include. So they were arguing about money. The people in charge of the FA, the Premier League, and the Football League, I think, don't live in the real world. I really don't. I think some of the club owners don't live in the real world either. And some of the players, I think, need stepping down a notch in regards to their entitlement. Because what we've seen is we had the Premier League pay-per-view fiasco, which went down quite badly. Best way to describe that. We had the debate about salary caps, and then we had Liverpool Man United's proposal to shrink the Premier League, which went down like a sack of potatoes. And then suddenly out of nowhere, within 6 months, we had this European Super League proposal, which was again driven by overseas owners and Tottenham, to make as much money as possible for a very select few. And ironically, that takes money out of the game, because. And then very, very quickly that went to pieces, because I think anyone with half a brain realises that football is a business. However, there has to come a point where you're going, there's too much money floating around and too much entitlement to just not care about the system, that the system is broken. So, and people ask me what my favourite sports are. And I come back and I say football is not my favourite sport. I do the most videos on football because it's the most popular sport globally. But football is not my favourite sport. And there has to be reform to it. There has to be changes. And the problems don't just lie with the big clubs. It lies with the governance of the game. With the proposal from FIFA of saying we want a 2-year World Cup cycle, which is ridiculous. If we're discussing player welfare, that is a ridiculous idea. The fact that the Africa Cup of Nations takes place every 2 years is partly because for a variety of reasons, and it always takes place mid-season. So European clubs always lose their best African players. Palace had 3 players at the Africa Cup of Nations yesterday. Crikey, Swindon had a player at the Africa Cup of Nations. So, even League Two clubs are affected by the Africa Cup of Nations. And they play at that time of year because it's the time of year when the temperatures are the least lethal to players because some parts of Africa hit 50 degrees in mid-July. Now, the Africa Cup of Nations has been on a 2-year cycle for forever. It just had. But a bigger concern, I think, for me, looking at FIFA's proposal, is UEFA have said they're against it, and then the Scandinavian countries, and people go, "Oh, they're only the Scandinavian countries." When they're saying, "We're not going to go, we're going to boycott," Sweden and Norway and Denmark, for example, have a lot of standing in the game, big standing in the game historically, and when they're saying we're going to boycott, it does send a message, a big message. Sweden have hosted a World Cup before. Thoughts on the upcoming World Cup? Does boycott? Well, look, we've already seen political and political boycotts, for example, of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. So there's a lot of countries not sending diplomats and their diplomatic kind of heads of the Olympic associations. There's a political boycott of the Winter Olympics. We've seen political boycotts in Summer and Winter Olympics before. Does boycott? Thoughts on the upcoming World Cup? Look, I've been very, very clear on my thoughts on the upcoming World Cup since the channels existed, basically. You look at any live stream over the last 4 years, I've been very consistent in my thoughts that on the World Cup, and the criticism of FIFA has been there. Now, they've already had to move the timing of the World Cup to midwinter for the Northern Hemisphere, which is now having the impact right now on league seasons. And people are going, what? You look at the rearranged Euros, the condensed, look how many international breaks we had before Christmas. I think it was 3 or 4 international breaks. They had to cram in all these qualifiers. Plus, then you've got the playoffs. Then at the end of the season, you got this Nations League, which I'm not sold on as a concept personally. I think it's another unnecessary splurge on the international calendar. There are better ways to organise the international calendar. And then you've got FIFA basically telling Arsene Wenger to do some research. And Wenger's done his research and says, look, this is the proposal that I've been told to look at, this 2-year World Cup cycle, which then screws over the Euros, actually does fuck up the Africa Cup of Nations. Not going to lie there, it does. So FIFA are trying to chase money. Now, this 2-year World Cup cycle won't come in until after the 2026 World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. So it's not going to happen straight away. There's another World Cup already penciled in. There's a World Cup bid that England are considering with Ireland, or the UK and Ireland, should I say, the home nations and Ireland for 2030, which is the next one after the US, Canada, Mexico one. And we're also considering the 2028 Euros. So the UK plus Ireland are considering a joint bid for both the Euros in 2028 and the 2030 World Cup. So 8 years away. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, it'll be interesting to see what other countries or other host nations, because the World Cup is going to be an expanded tournament by the next tournament in the US, Canada, and Mexico. It's going to be more teams. How many more joint host nations, how many more proposals are put forward saying that we want to host this? Because if no one else wants to bid, then it's like, oh, well, here's the tournament. We have the infrastructure in place. We proved that at the Euros when we had multiple, we had London and Edinburgh, or Glasgow, should I say, Hampden Park, hosting matches. We proved that, we have the infrastructure in place. We've hosted Rugby Union and Rugby League World Cups, Cricket World Cups, Commonwealth Games, Olympic Games. We have the sporting infrastructure in place to host either a Euros or a World Cup. However, the Minister for Sport, Media and Culture is saying we shouldn't actually bid for the World Cup. We should only bid for the Euros. The World Cup brings more money, dipshit. It's going to be interesting to see if they do go ahead with such things. In regards to boycotting it to achieve anything, if FIFA are persisting with this 2-year plan, which I think is ridiculous, personally. If we're discussing player welfare, then the 2-year World Cup plan that they are proposing is ridiculous. And if UEFA say we're not going, that ultimately damages the FIFA as a brand, because the European leagues and the European players are the best players in the world, alongside the South Americans at a push, right? The best South American players play in Europe. So if the UEFA-based nations are saying we're not going to go, imagine if like a European or several European nations were meant to host the tournament and they go, actually we're going to pull out. You've got to find a host then with the infrastructure in place, with stadiums that meet FIFA required standards in place, enough of them, enough infrastructure to host an expanded tournament. It's going to be bigger at short notice. That's going to be it's not going to happen. I think UEFA are going to stick to their guns. I believe the South Americans are also in favour of being against it. So it's only the up and coming federations like Africa and the Middle East, basically where all the corrupt warlords live, who take all the UN money and then kill their own people. What do you think of not having a host country? I didn't like that Euros personally. Look at the pandemic. A host country got all. UEFA said they're never going to do it again. They knew straight away it was a mistake to go, well, it's our 60th anniversary since the first year. We're going to have a pan-European tournament, and that's fine. But very, very quickly, when the pandemic hit and they had to delay it a year, they came out and said, we're never doing this ever again. UEFA, that was a Platini idea. Serafin, as soon as he took over, said, look, we're going to stick with what we've got. Bearing in mind how many host cities actually pulled out. So Dublin, Brussels, I think there was a few other host cities that pulled out, which then created logistical headaches. Serafin said, we're never doing this ever again. It's not going to happen again. Joint hosts, yes, we've seen that be successful before in the Euros and World Cups. I don't think we see a pan-continental tournament ever again. Europe being the smallest continent, that was a logistical nightmare. So imagine doing a pan-African tournament or a pan-South American. It would be just a nightmare, absolute nightmare. And to be fair, I'll say it from my standpoint. Having seen the Olympic torch go past my house in 2012, and my ex-partner at the time actually lived by some of the venues as well. Being a host nation for a tournament is an amazing thing. It really is. Being the host of an international tournament is an amazing thing. Being the host of any tournament, be it a city host or you're hosting a world championship event, it's an amazing thing. I've seen the World Cup downhill skiing at Bormio. I've seen the World Mountain Bike Championship in Italy in 2005. And what that brings to a community or a country, it is a really massive thing. That was the first tournament that was pan-continental, and UEFA said it's never happening ever again. And if we are being serious about, player welfare, fan enjoyment, as well, the fan experience, because the fans always get put last. You look at the price of some of the tickets for the 2019 Champions League and Europa League finals; they were ridiculous. What they were going for. And again, UEFA faced a lot of criticism, not just from the British fans, but from, if you look at the semi-finals and quarterfinals, when you had a rough idea, there's only a couple of nations that are going to be, having clubs at those finals. To get the two furthest locations away was ridiculous. There is the crowd disorder at the Euros final was disappointing. In fact, it was unacceptable. But look what happened in France in Euro 2016. It wasn't just English fans misbehaving. Germany in 2006, there was a lot of crowd trouble with German and Polish thugs kicking the crap out of each other in Dortmund, I remember. Poland, Ukraine, 2012. There was big issues with the Russian and Polish and Ukrainian fans wanting to kill each other. It's not just an English problem or a European problem. Well, a British problem. The issues in regards to UEFA and FIFA. We were one of the FAs that highlighted the corruption at FIFA. They didn't like that. They didn't like being told you're corrupt. There was basically Greg Dyke came out and said this is we had bribe money, we just didn't have enough. He basically highlighted how corrupt FIFA were back in the bidding process for the Russia and Qatar World Cups. And FIFA didn't like that being exposed, and then the media exposed them, and then it was like, oh, actually, we told you so. The not having the World Cup be ridiculous. The Premier League is one of the biggest, if not the biggest league in the world. We have the stadium infrastructure. We don't need to rebuild a shed load of stadiums and a shed load of train stations and airports. We have that infrastructure already here. So ironically, it will cost less for us to host an international tournament than, let's say, I don't know. Look how much money Poland and Ukraine spent on their stadiums. Half the Ukrainian stadiums are in ruins. Look how much money Brazil spent on their stadium infrastructure. Half of them are in ruins. Like, when it comes to hosting international tournaments, if we were to put a bid in, it would cost so little money because all the stadiums are already up to spec. We've got enough stadiums up to specification that meet FIFA regulations as an international stadium for minimum capacity. Even in League One, we have stadiums that are technically big enough to host international football at a World Cup. So, in regards to actually bidding for the tournament, ironically, it will cost less money to put the tournament on and make therefore more revenue for FIFA by giving us the World Cup. Ironically, because the stadium infrastructure is in place. We have world-class stadiums. You can debate how soulless some of these stadiums are, but we have the world-class facilities already in place. We have the infrastructure for hotel space there. We have, a lot of things already in place that places like Qatar have had to spend the best part of a decade building at great cost, with a whole host of human rights abuses in the process, with people dying on building sites, which happens. People do die on the job. It is construction and sanitation jobs are quite dangerous. There's always a risk in those kind of construction and sanitations. That's waste disposal industries and things like that. They are the two most dangerous jobs after the armed forces. Working in construction and infrastructure projects and sanitation, they are the most dangerous jobs out there. I do it for a living. But the issues with the Qatar one especially was they only had one stadium that met minimum FIFA requirements to host an international. They've had to build all these stadiums that are what's going to happen to them afterwards. They are just there as vanity projects. Whereas over in Europe and in England especially, and to be fair, the UK as a whole, because you've got Cardiff and Swansea have world-class facilities, be it the Principality Stadium or the Liberty Stadium, Cardiff City Stadium. You've got in Dublin, you've got Croke Park and Lansdowne Road. Two fantastic stadiums, or the Aviva as it's called for sponsorship purposes, but the new Lansdowne Road. Scotland, you've got Hampden, you've got Ibrox, Celtic, Parkhead. You've got in Edinburgh, you've got Murrayfield, and then you look at England and you just look at all the stadiums England has. For me, it will be a brain dead decision not to award a World Cup or a Euros to the UK and Ireland. Be brain dead because you've got all those world class facilities already, and then you've got to remember every year we have the Six Nations, where you've got things like Twickenham, Murrayfield, Principality, formerly the Millennium Stadium. You've got Croke Park and Lansdowne Road that have hosted games. It's a brain dead decision not to. It's more cost effective and probably make you more money having it in the UK and Ireland, because you're only 5 hours ahead of the East Coast in the US. So for TV, you can still have great TV viewership, and then the rest of continental Europe is either on the same time zone or up to 2 to 3 hours ahead. So for TV, it's perfect. Plus, you know, it the best players play in the European leagues, primarily in the Premier League. I can't see why they wouldn't want a tournament here because the amount of new stadiums that have been built, and yeah, we can argue about the atmosphere within them and how soulless they are and how they all look the same, but they're up to FIFA standard. They're up to UEFA standard to host Champions League final and Europa League finals. We've got some of the biggest stadiums in the world. Um, I can't see why we're not hosting tournaments. But at the same time, in the build-up to the bidding process for Qatar and Russia, we did sort of expose there's a lot of corruption here, and governments at the time weren't willing to put the money behind it because we had the Olympics. They weren't really willing to put the financial incentives in place to sell the game and to drive the bidding process. And now, when you've got the Ministry for Sport coming out going, "Yeah, we really shouldn't bid for the World Cup. We should try Euros." It's not really, the option is there. We have the facilities, the global game. We invented the fucking sport. We wrote the rules of the sport down. If it wasn't for the founding of the Football League in, God, in the 1880s, I believe, and some of the football clubs are older than that. We don't have the sport we have today. And it amazes me why UEFA wouldn't want to host a tournament here. The amount of money they make out of the English clubs in the Champions League and Europa League is ridiculous. It's sort of paying back, I can see why there's some concerns. And yeah, the Euros final, the crowd disorder was a disgrace. Um, but we've seen other nations in qualifiers and tournaments misbehave for years. It's not just an English problem or a British problem. It's a football problem that Europe and South America and the Middle East has that you don't get in North America. The US Canadian fans are really shocked by how brutal the hooligan element is over here in Europe. It's not just an English problem, as I say. They really can't get their heads around it. They're going to be in for a shock in 4 years' time. When there is fan misbehaviour, they are going to be in for a shock. They really are. They just can't get their heads round the tribalism. They really can't. So they're going to be in for a massive shock. But they've already hosted the tournament in '94. But they are going to be in for a big shock. There's definitely been a rise in disorder at games is the best way to describe it. But they are going to be in for a shock in 4 years' time. Crikey, I'll be 36 in 4 years' time. Oh my God, I'm getting old. Hopefully this channel's making a lot of money by then and I don't have to be a bin man anymore and work in sanitation. But I can see some of the reasons why UEFA and FIFA don't want the UK holding football tournaments. At the same time, it makes a lot of logical sense, as I say, because the infrastructure is in place. You couldn't ask for having better infrastructure, basically. A lot of the Premier League, as I say, there are stadiums in League One that are technically FIFA compliant to host a tournament match. There are some stadiums in League One that can do it. The Stadium of Light. You've got Wigan. The DW. There's quite a few stadiums actually. That's what's really amazing is the stadium infrastructure, even at the lower levels of the game, is in place. It is there, all-seater, in place, have been in place for 20 odd years, up to spec. We hosted Euro '96. We've hosted Rugby League and Rugby Union World Cup since then. We've had Commonwealth Games in Glasgow and Manchester. Birmingham's about to have a Commonwealth Games. We've had Champions League finals, Europa League finals. We've had a Cricket World Cup. The UK. Look, we've also had Wales hosted the Rugby Union World Cup with some games being played in England and Scotland. So the UK has had Rugby World Cups, Rugby League World Cups, Cricket World Cups, the Euros in '96, Champions League finals, Commonwealth Games, Olympics, as I say, had all these major international events. We host Wimbledon every year. We host F1 races every year, MotoGP races every year. We have international sporting events where people from around the world come, even for it's a weekend or a longer tournament, without any hassle. We've been doing it a long, long time, and we're very, very good at it. That's why I find it really, really surprising that UEFA and FIFA have gone, they hosted one of the best Olympics we've actually ever seen in the modern era. I'm very surprised by their resistance to hosting a tournament here. But I do think the European Super League debacle will put a black mark against us as a nation with UEFA. The fan disorder at Euro 2020 would the Euros final and a few other games goes against us, absolutely. FIFA, I mean, look, FIFA, they've got to think here because it's a moneymaker for them. It really is a moneymaker for them. The North American market would just love a World Cup in England because they're obsessed with how we like, the history of everything, really. They really are. The US market would definitely buy into that. They've already bought into club football. So you're going to have the US and Canadian fans salivating over a World Cup in England. Salivating. It is a moneymaker because, as I say, the infrastructure is in place, and therefore you have to put less money aside for infrastructure improvements because the stadiums are already up to spec, and therefore more money can go on fan zones, investment in the wider communities that the games are going to be played, redevelopment of certain areas, great, but that's already there. The clubs are already in themselves upgrading their stadiums because they want to host Champions League finals. They want to host Europa League finals. They want to put those bids into UEFA saying, look, bring us one of your European finals to our stadium. They want to make their stadiums meet UEFA requirements. So if they do qualify for Europe, they don't have to ground share. So that is an interesting question. There are some drawbacks. I mean, yes, there's a lot of politics behind the scenes with the various FAs when it comes to UEFA meetings, when it comes to FIFA meetings. In regards to what happens after the US-Canada World Cup with Mexico as well, in regards to hosting, who actually wins the bid for that 2030 World Cup? That's 8 years away. That may seem like a long time ahead. It's not. It really isn't. 8 years will fly by like that. 8 years ago, I was 24. It was 2014. I was laying cable in Birmingham. Seems like yesterday. That was 8 years ago, 2014. The Brazil World Cup was 8 years ago. This summer. It seems like it took place yesterday. So 8 years is not as long as you think. It's a two World Cup cycle. There's 2 more Euros in there. It'll be interesting to see what other nations or put forward a bid because the bidding process will be starting soon, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Really interesting. I really enjoyed the Russia World Cup, for example. I thought that was a brilliant tournament. But FIFA is going to go where they can make as much revenue as possible. And they're going to find that this Qatar World Cup is not going to make them as much revenue as they thought. So they're going to play safe with a future tournament. I have no doubt they're going to play safe. And the fact that this 2-year World Cup cycle they want is not going to happen for a generation. I can tell you that because if it was, there'd already be a bidding process for a 2028 World Cup and a 2030. There isn't one. So this 2-year World Cup cycle isn't going to happen anytime soon. It will probably happen when I'm in my 40s or early 50s. So it's probably 20, 25 years down the track. And it'll probably get kicked down the road because UEFA will constantly resist it. And it makes sense to go against it because we're talking about fixture congestion. We're talking about player welfare. Christian Eriksen. I was going to put that out there. What happened to Christian Eriksen? What's happened to Sergio Aguero mid-game? There's been a whole host of other players as well who've had heart problems mid-game or in training. You can see us. If you've got star players like that collapsing in the middle of the game, basically dying on the pitch, you've got problems. Player welfare has got to be the number one priority right now. And fans, I don't think, will be willing to fork out the money with what's happened economically and with this COVID pandemic. I just don't think it's going to work because we're already seeing the fixture headache that this current World Cup that we're going to have in 11 months is causing this season. And that's before COVID on top of that, because this World Cup was already penciled in for a winter, a winter slot before the pandemic even was, I think. And we were already raising concerns about, it's going to be a mid-season, so what does that mean for we'll have to shut down our domestic leagues in Europe for what, 6 weeks? Oh, hell. Got the little bugger, got the loose hair. So there's already that subplot. Is there were concerns raised when Qatar were awarded it, and very, very quickly went, it's going to be too hot to play. We're going to move it to the winter, but it's still too hot to play, so we're going to have to play more games in the evening, which is crap for TV because the time zone difference. So I don't think the TV viewership is going to be that great. I don't think, looking at how the World Championship athletics played out in Qatar, they had to pay people to go and watch. They actually had to pay people to go and watch. As a test event, that was shocking. Athletes were like, it was really weird. And this is again before COVID. They're like, it's really weird running in front of like a 15% capacity crowd, no atmosphere, really odd. Didn't enjoy it. So they had to pay people to go. So I don't think it's going to be a great spectacle. I don't think it's going to be a great tournament. Obviously, the players are going to try their best. Obviously, they're going to put the effort in. The coaches are going to select the best players they can. But I just don't think it's going to be a great tournament. And I feel sorry for those players who are going to be participating at a tournament that's going to go down like a sack of potatoes. And it's going to make FIFA look very red-faced. And in regards to political boycotts of sporting events, we've seen it have a certain impact. It's called soft power. So if you study your Cold War history, the US and the USSR boycotted each other's Olympics in the 80s. It does have a certain impact if the best athletes aren't competing, because you as the fan are paying to see the best of the best compete against each other. So when they're boycotting for whatever reason, be it political or social reasons, it does have an impact on viewership figures, on merchandise sales. It does have an impact. And I think, if we're being honest, I do think with this Winter Olympics in Beijing, there's definitely going to be, there's been a diplomatic boycott. I've been awake. I've been awake since 3:30 this morning. It's my body clock. I normally get up early for my work, so I don't really zone out anymore. I'm always up early. Uh, I will be doing a video on the Rugby League World Cup and delaying it a year. Was it the right decision? I will also be doing my NRL 2022 season preview video. I'll be doing it in one video this year, not the separate 16 teams, because I just do not have the time. Last year, my job was different. I was commuting. I had my own transport. This year, my days are just longer. I have less time in the evening to do that kind of in-depth, break it down and do a 10-minute video on each side. That's 160 minutes of footage I would record. So I'm just going to do it in one. Look at what I would just also I'll be breaking down the NRL season preview, which is one video. And there's a lot to talk about because obviously with what's happening with the pandemic, the Novak Djokovic situation, he's got his court appeal tomorrow. I don't do logo and kit rankings, but yeah, this is the last year of a 16-team league. Obviously, the league is going to get bigger next year with Dolphins joining. And I do think the NRL played safe with that. They saw money there. We'll have that. There's got to be an 18th team at some point. There's been hints that it's going to be within the next 3 years. Where they put it, I don't know. And we've discussed various options of where an 18th team will go. It's just where they decide to put it. I'll be interested to see how this season plays out, and what restrictions are in place for fans and players for the NRL this year. That's going to be something that's very, very interesting that I think will have wide-reaching implications. Um, but I will be doing a one-off video. I'm not going to do all 16 teams. I just don't have the time. I did enjoy, like, breaking down the season preview for each team, but I just don't have the time. So that's sort of a time saving exercise. It may mean the video itself is actually longer, which could be interesting. Um, but uh, there's still player movement happening. There's still, obviously with what happened with the Melbourne Storm at the end of last season with Cameron Smith and Cameron. I know Brandon Smith, sorry, and Cameron Munster. That's I think, going to have an impact at the start of this season. So there's a lot of things in play. Reece Walsh with the Warriors as well. So those off-field indiscretions at the end of last season, I think, are going to impact this season, going into this season. The New Zealand Warriors have a home game at Mount Smart, and that is yet to be determined. We'll see what happens with the Warriors because this could be their third year away from home, and there's a possibility they might get permanently relocated to the Central Coast. That has been discussed. I don't know what's going to happen to the Warriors this year. Quite frankly, it's been difficult for the Warriors, having to basically relocate. That will impact what players you can recruit. Player retention, players who want to stick around, and that uncertainty is having a massive impact. We'll see what happens this year. It's up in the air. I haven't seen anything in the media saying that they're going to play any home games yet. Although it was planned last year they would play some games at home after round 7. That didn't materialise, so it's a fluid situation. In regards to their long term, what happens in the long term, they may have to permanently relocate to Australia. It could end up being so costly having to host them away from home that they may have to permanently relocate. But we'll see what happens. I think the NRL is in a much better position than the Super League to handle that kind of situation. Look what happened with the Wolfpack and the Ottawa Aces. That went to mess very, very quickly when they were unable to play because of the restrictions and resume play a year and a half ago. So we'll see what happens with the Warriors. It will be interesting to see how it all plays out with the Warriors, whether they end up playing any games in New Zealand at all, or whether they have to play another whole season in Australia. That's a watch this space. With the Warriors, it is generally a watch this space. That is up in the air. It all depends on what the Australian government and state governments agree with the New Zealand government over a transit corridor, and what restrictions New Zealand will have on visiting teams as well, because other NRL teams do take games to New Zealand on the road, and that hasn't happened for a couple of years. So there's a lot of pieces in play there, and it will be interesting to see how it all plays out. Very, very interesting, but nothing is set in stone yet in regards to what's going to happen. So that your guess is as good as mine. We'll just see how it all plays out. Hello, welcome to the stream. Please get your questions in. I'll be interested to see what your thoughts are and what you've got to ask. But yeah, in regards to the questions we've had so far, my thoughts on the upcoming World Cup. I'm not so sure it's going to be the greatest tournament. I'll be interested to see the viewing figures and the attendance figures in the stadium. In regards to not having a host country, UEFA said they're not going to do a pan-European Euros anymore, and I don't think there'll ever be a pan-continental tournament anymore. It's always going to be a host nation or host nations. In regards to why UEFA and FIFA don't want UK hosting football tournaments, I think it actually makes financial sense to actually have a tournament here. It's whether which one we get and which one we put our backing behind, because we're in the running for both the 2028 Euros and the 2030 World Cup, be it as a host nation or as a co-host nation. So again, that's going to be interesting how that plays out. But yeah, in regards to the Warriors, that's going to be an ongoing issue, I think, for the NRL to solve, and that's up to the state and federal governments of both New Zealand and Australia to work out some kind of travel exemption for them, vaccination status of players, testing regime. The whole thing is going to be very, very interesting. How that plays out, and in what regards, you know, protocols in place. We know obviously with the Novak Djokovic situation, he's got a court appearance tomorrow morning, Australian time. So in about 12 hours, he'll be appealing his visa denial in court. So we'll see if Djokovic can play at the Australian Open. That's going to have a massive bearing on what happens with the Warriors, I do honestly believe, because they're classed as an overseas team. If they are to come over to Australia, it has to be soon because pre-season starts end of January, beginning of February. So the NRL is sort of running on a tight schedule here with the Warriors. They have to make a decision very, very soon. They have to have provisions in place. The Central Coast has been a brilliant home for them, I have to admit. The residents have basically adopted them as a new team. If worse comes to worse, I can see them being relocated to Australia permanently. But that's my personal opinion. There are a lot of TV agreements in place with Sky New Zealand that have to be met. There's obviously the TV deal obviously has been renegotiated since the start of the pandemic by Andrew Abdo and Peter V'landys a year and a half ago. So there's a lot of contractual arrangements and agreements in place for the Warriors. That makes it a bit difficult what happens with them playing Mount Smart or not. And yeah, it's been very, very quiet on the rugby league front in recent weeks. So obviously, I'll try and catch up with the rugby league NRL news. What we've seen with the Super League is if a team can't field a team, they have to forfeit 48-0 and they will face sanctions. So it will be interesting to see what happens. And of course, we've got the Rugby League World Cup at the end of the year. It's been moved back a year. I think in hindsight, it was the right decision to delay by a year. The way it was handled initially with Australia and New Zealand pulling out could have been handled a lot better. That's something that's been discussed on this channel before. It, as I say, could have been handled better. You know, with hindsight and what we know now, it was the correct decision. However, it does create more logistical headaches further down the line. But again, we shall see what happens and how that tournament proceeds. If it goes really well, that actually goes in the benefit of any Football World Cup bid that the UK and Ireland may want to put on the table for the 2030 World Cup or the 2028 Euros. So the Rugby League World Cup does actually have a bearing on other international tournaments, ironically. Because if we can host that successfully and, it be a brilliant tournament, that actually, ironically, impacts our proposal to bid for a Euros or a World Cup at the end of the decade. So there is a lot riding on this Rugby League World Cup, ironically, a lot riding on it outside of Rugby League. I think it will have a massive impact on a potential bid for the Euros and a potential bid for the World Cup at the end of the decade. But a lot can happen between now and the end of the year. A lot can happen and will happen. It's a very fluid situation. It looks like we're coming out of the worst of the pandemic now, but the economic damage that has been caused could also have an impact on whether we bid for the World Cup and the Euros at the end of the decade, the 28 Euros and the 2030 World Cup. So a lot can happen, but the FA are seriously considering it alongside the Irish FA. There is a serious consideration being put forward by all the home nations. They're trying to get all the Scottish, the Northern Irish, and the Welsh FAs on the table as well to put a joint bid together. So that in itself is really, really interesting. There's a lot of behind the scenes negotiations. The Irish FA is basically bankrupt, so they could use a massive cash injection by hosting a tournament as well. That will massively benefit the Irish FA. So there's a lot on the table in regards to going back to the World Cup bid and whether we bid for it or bid for the Euros. Either way, it's going to be vitally important that if we do put a bid in, we put a bid in early. and get our bidding team together early. As I say, we have the infrastructure, and of course, this Rugby League World Cup will have a massive bearing on whether we are considered to host a tournament or not when it comes to football. That'll be my view on it. Personally, that in itself is an interesting subplot. There's a lot of political machinations that have to take place, a lot of discussions between various governing bodies for that to happen as well. But we will see what happens in regards to that. But that is a very interesting subplot in the background. What else can we discuss sports-wise? So yeah, Novak Djokovic is going to have his appeal tomorrow in regards to his visa denial. And what comes out of that could actually, as I say, impact the Warriors, whether they play at Mount Smart at all this season or whether they play all their games in Australia. That'll be a very interesting subplot with what gets decided there. So Josh Butler is to miss the final Ashes test with a hand injury, but Ben Stokes and Johnny Bairstow are to go to Hobart for the 5th test. Where else is it? Rafa Benitez is under a lot of pressure at Everton as well. There's a lot of speculation about his position, and with Everton's league form being disastrous right now, they survived a gritty game against Hull. Obviously, Chelsea beat Chesterfield, and Lukaku obviously played in that game. With what's going on with Lukaku, how is he going to be there in the summer? Is he going to actually be there in this transfer window? And he hasn't really hit top form at Chelsea. He's only scored 8 goals this season in all competitions. So yeah, there's that playing out. The 4th round draw takes place later for the FA Cup, so that's another thing. Right, what we've got today. So we've got Luton versus Harrogate today. Cardiff Preston is a 2:00. Charlton at Norwich is a 2:00. Liverpool Shrewsbury is a 2:00. Stoke Leyton Orient is a 2:00. Tottenham Morecambe is a 2:00. West Ham Leeds is a 2:00, and Wolves Sheffield United is a 2:00. And then you have the Nottingham Forest Arsenal game, which is a 5:10 kickoff. So Luton Harrogate Town, I think, is going to be a very interesting game at 12:30 lunchtime kickoff. Hopefully the weather conditions have improved further north because it rained so much the last couple of days. It's been a lot of rain and a bit of snow as well. So we'll see how Kenilworth Lane's pitch holds up, because that is known to be a very poor pitch when weather's bad. Let me just check which game is on ITV Player. Let's just have a look at what is on the TV guide, because I know all the games are on ITV this weekend, on free-to-air broadcast. Let's just have a quick look-see, and I'll get back to the questions. Come on, load, you pathetic TV. I don't want to play anything. TV guide's what I want. Let's have a look. Yep, I am logged in, so stop being a dimwad. Right, let's have a look with what is on the TV guide. Okay. Right, let's have a look. Oh, Butch Cassidy on the Sundance Kid is on. Right, so 4:20. Okay, so the Luton Harrogate game is not on the TV, so it'll be one of the 2:00 kickoffs. It'll be one of the televised games. That's going to be really interesting. But I think it's going to be very, very interesting looking at some of the FA Cup titles. I think West Ham Leeds is going to be a really good game. Leeds obviously been struggling this season. could this be an opportunity to kickstart their season? And West Ham are doing really well in the league. They're in form. They could be eyeing an FA Cup run to try and get some sort of get a gateway into Europe. But they are doing quite well in the league. They're in the European places right now as we speak. So there is a lot of subplots to this. Obviously, teams like Everton under a lot of pressure. Rafa Benitez, there's a lot of speculation about his job. Could he be the next manager on the chopping block? Obviously, Newcastle losing yesterday 1-0 to Cambridge United at home. A lot of work for Newcastle United to focus on. So there's a lot of subplots. But yes, looking forward to the FA Cup games this afternoon. The couple on. Of course, there are no replays. So if it's after 90 minutes, it goes straight to extra time and then penalties. Could we have seen the last ever FA Cup replays, with Ipswich Barrow being the last replay that we've seen in the second round? Could that be the last FA Cup replay ever? That's something else that needs to be considered. A lot of people are saying our replays, they're outdated, they're old. It's time to move on from them. So that's an interesting one in itself. Could Barrow versus Ipswich Town be the last ever FA Cup replay we ever see? That is a question that is being asked. I mean, it was mentioned last night in commentary during the Millwall Crystal Palace game yesterday afternoon. Could Barrow Ipswich be the last replay we ever see? And it is a big possibility with the fixture congestion as it is, and with the World Cup next year. We could see the end of FA Cup replays, and that in itself will be a massive blow for the lower league clubs that rely heavily on the FA Cup revenue to make a lot of their money. So yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out in regards to what the FA decides. We know they've scrapped replays permanently from the fourth round onwards. This year they've got rid of the third round onwards because of the World Cup, and it could be that the first and second round replays disappear altogether as well. It'll be interesting to see what the clubs have to say on that. The non-league clubs, especially, and League One and League Two clubs will be impacted as well to a certain extent. What they have to say in regards to scrapping replays, they have to have a say. But I can remember semi-final and final replays back in the day in the 90s. That was a thing. Yeah. And as time has gone on, they've slowly got rid of replays throughout the FA Cup competition. But again, how to reform football and its competitions. I have some ideas. I've mentioned them in videos before in regards to European UEFA Cup competitions all the way through to the FA Cup, the League Cup, promotion, relegation. How many teams should get promoted from League Two or relegated from League Two, for example? There's calls to expand promotion from the National League into League Two and expand relegation from League Two into the National League. A whole host of questions being raised in regards to the football pyramids. The European Super League has thrown up a lot of questions in regards to how the sport is governed, who gets what, TV deals in place, and fans feel, and I completely understand this standpoint, is fans aren't considered in decision making. Their concerns are obviously put at the bottom of the inbox tray. And fan protests did have a massive bearing on why the European Super League failed the way it did. And I think club owners need to be aware that if you piss off your hardcore fan base, you're going to have a great difficulty attracting new fans when your hardcore fans are like threatening boycotts and protests and making it known very publicly on TV what they think of you. Yes, making money is a thing, but misjudging the fan receptiveness. Because 6 months earlier, a survey was done, and younger fans were more in favour of it, which I found surprising. The limited survey size done, but as the months wore on, and as the plans and the structures of the European Super League were leaked, it was basically a power grab. It was basically trying to force UEFA into into those clubs' demands, and it sort of backfired on them when UEFA said no. Um, and there's still the reason why the European Super League got as far as it did was again weak governance for a long period of time, with successive presidents of UEFA and successive weak governance within the Premier League and domestic leagues across Europe and the domestic FAs, allowing basically a handful of clubs to basically call the tune in regards to the direction the game is taking, basically holding the game hostage for their greed. And when we found out how much debt they got themselves in and the situations they got themselves in over a long period of time, it really highlighted, the poor structures that have been allowed to take place over many years. And you could argue UEFA is part of the problem. Now, I do think Alexander Serafin is the right guy to take UEFA forward. I think Michel Platini and his forebears had laid a lot of the problems that football is facing right now within UEFA. And right now, UEFA and FIFA are sort of at war over this World Cup proposal. So it will be interesting to see how far this 2-year World Cup cycle proposal, how much traction it actually gets. And, what I find interesting is the South American and European nations are against it quite openly. Whereas the African nations, the Asian nations are really in favour of it. Now, we'll see what happens, but if you don't have the European South American nations at a World Cup, it completely devalues the tournament. Going back to the topic of boycotting, does it achieve anything? It does to a certain extent. It does put pressure on the money men, so to speak, people who've invested large sums of cash and corporate sponsorships in when it does have an impact, because at the end of the day, the wider public are what are paying to watch these tournaments. And if there is a boycott and they're not watching and they're not paying for product, your bottom line, the businessmen feel it on the bottom line. And I do think this Qatar World Cup is definitely not going to be the moneymaker FIFA believed it was. It's going to come back to haunt FIFA for a generation. It absolutely will. I mean, look, the question over boycotts though, and how do they achieve anything? They do. They honestly do achieve stuff. Be it if you're boycotting an individual company, all the way through to boycotting international sporting events, it does have an impact. It does, because you as a fan want to watch the best of the best compete, and if the best of the best isn't there, it does have an impact on the product you are watching and the quality of the product at play. So when Australia and New Zealand pulled out of the Rugby League World Cup, it had the impact of basically cancelling it for a year. Now that's not technically a boycott necessarily; they were raising health concerns. But two of the bigger nations in rugby league we're not going to this tournament within a week. When the tournament organisers saying no, it's going ahead within a week, it was like no, we're postponing a year. So if the big nations were to boycott of any potential World Cup, yeah, it would definitely have an impact. And as we've been discussing with player welfare concerns in regards to playing as many games as they are, and the amount of injuries we have seen, and I bet you in the 2 FA Cup games I watched today, I'll be very interested to see how many players are rested because of injury concerns, and how many of the younger players, the youth players, get a game. And we've been talking about how the big teams don't take the third and fourth round seriously. They put out weakened sides in the FA Cup and League Cup. And Man City basically named the strongest available starting 11 they could. Their bench was basically their youth side, but that was the strongest available side they could name at the time. And that is because of injuries, suspensions, and COVID. That was the strongest available team they could put out against Swindon. So they weren't resting players because, oh, we're resting players. We're like, this is the strongest side we can put on the field. So I'll be interested to see, the lineups in today's games that I watch. The Arsenal-Nottingham Forest game is going to be interesting because Arsenal do have a midweek game in the League Cup semi-final first leg against Liverpool. That's been delayed by a week. So they're going to have fixture congestion down the line. And Liverpool as well. They've had a COVID outbreak, so we're going to be very interested to see the side they managed to field today as well. And it's going to be interesting. And it'll be interesting to see how many players are off with the virus and how many players are off with injury. Because I have noticed, as I said earlier in the stream, the Chesterfield Salford City game, for example, in the second round a month ago, 17 players between both sides were unavailable for selection because of injury alone. That's not just COVID, that is injury by itself. 17 players not available for selection. Now, that is criminal. And that is it doesn't matter what level of the pyramid you are playing at, when you've basically got a whole starting matchday squad unavailable. Because that's basically what it is. That's a whole matchday starting squad unavailable between two teams. That's basically a third of the players that they have on their books not available on game day. That is ridiculous. That says to me something is definitely wrong with what is going on. Hang on one second. What am I doing? I've lost the bloody plot. But in order to lose the plot, I had to have the plot in the first place, which I don't think I had. Right, we're back. Right. Spiffing. But yes, so player availability, and this is going to be an ongoing discussion as we go into the World Cup, as we deal with the backlog of COVID fixtures, as I'm going to call them, the backlog of games postponed because of the bad weather for Christmas, and now the pandemic on top of that. We're going to have crazy fixture congestion in the rest of January, February, and March. It's going to be ridiculous, and we're not even talking about the European UEFA Europa League and Champions League games yet. We know Tottenham obviously had to forfeit their Europa Conference League game and therefore couldn't qualify for the next round. We could get to a situation where, more games are going to get cancelled. Absolutely, it's going to happen. Where we cannot fulfil fixtures. That is a real possibility. We saw it last year in the non-league. In the National League and below, where some teams, when they were playing in the FA Cup, hadn't played for 2 months in league form. And then when it came to resuming play, Dover Athletic couldn't resume the season. They just had so many outstanding fixtures they just could not fulfill. And so there's definitely a lot of headaches coming up. But also, I'm really looking forward to the fixtures that are going to be played today. I do believe there's the potential for a couple of upsets in there. I really do. Definitely a potential for some upsets. There's definitely a potential for some real cracking games, and I do hope the intensity is better than the games so far this weekend that I've seen. The Man City Swindon game had a bit of intensity in the second half. The first half was just too slow paced for me, and Palace Millwall game, while the intensity picked up as the game wore on, again, you could see the disjointed nature of both sides because of the amount of changes that had to be made. African Cup of Nations having an impact on the Palace side, so their front three wasn't their normal front three. So definitely, it's going to be interesting. Again, how many players are not available for selection for a variety of reasons, and I think Liverpool are going to be massively impacted without their African players, plus the COVID pandemic. Liverpool, I'll be very interested to see the strength of the side they put out on the field. And, it's one of them. It is one of them. But yeah, let's see what questions you guys have got to ask me because I'm still waiting for some more questions to come in. The ones we've had so far and the ones we had yesterday were really really good. All things be told. So I'll be interested to see what other questions and sports topics uh, people want to discuss. There is something else that I haven't discussed, and that's the Major League Baseball lockout. There's been no further headlines in any further progress in talks, and their pre-season is again rapidly approaching. So it'll be interesting what Major League Baseball does in the coming weeks to end the lockout. But as things currently stand, there's been no further resumption of talks in the new year. So with Major League Baseball, it's a watch this space mentality in regards to what's happening with the lockout talks and whether any motion is happening there, and there's going to be any discussions about resolving the labour dispute. Um, right, let's have a look. Baseball. Let's have a look. Let's see what's happening with the Major League Baseball lockout because right. Okay, apparently the Major League Baseball Players Association is likely to resume the CBA negotiations soon. So there's been some leak reports coming out that the um, the Players Association is willing to discuss the collective bargaining agreement. Um, so that came out on CBS Sports yesterday. So let's have a little read of this article. Um, okay, so Dane Perry is the journalist. He wrote this little article. Major League Baseball lockout. The Major League Baseball Players Association are like to restart CBA negotiations, that's collective bargaining agreement, negotiations soon, as a report. The owner lockout that's grounded Major League Baseball's off-season to a halt drags on, and two sides, players and team owners, haven't discussed the major issues since the labour stoppage commenced. Now, however, there's hope that discussions will begin again this month. They haven't given an exact date uh, and address the economic issues that are driving the current standoff. Major League, now the Athletics' Evan Drellich reports Major League Baseball is preparing new core economic proposals to deliver to the Players Association. When they're presented, likely at some point later this month, core economic talks in the sport will have restarted for the first time in over a month since December 2nd, making a positive development. Those economic issues don't figure to be easily resolved, however. From the players' standpoint, they'd like to address their shrinking share of those league revenues, indicated in part by the declining average player salary. That's not the top end players, it's average salary. The occasional practice of service time manipulation, when teams hold back a clearly ready prospect in order to delay his free agency and arbitration eligibility for a full year, and the tanking problem, among other matters. Teams have increasingly trended younger in their roster construction, and the union will be fighting to get those younger players paid more in line with their on-field value, whilst also seeking incentives to make teams more competitive with one another, because there is a massive imbalance in Major League Baseball. The owners, meantime, will likely be looking to maintain the status quo since the expiring CBA largely worked out to their benefit. One key battleground figures to be over the timelines for arbitration eligibility. Currently, 3 years of Major League Baseball service time in almost all instances, and free agency, currently 6 years of Major League Baseball service time. Layered on top of that is a host of lesser issues that could also prove challenging. The past is indeed prologue. Then the owner side will leak details of their next proposal. What will be telling is whether their revised proposal embodies genuine movement on the issues or has been owner's recent practice just a rearrangement of prior proposals. If it's the latter, then it's unlikely a new collective bargaining agreement will be forged soon. Whatever the case, the month of January will be a critical one at the bargaining table if spring training camps are to open on time. So basically, uh, there's been a few leaks saying that there's going to be proposals on the table and talks may resume later this month. But they have basically been at odds for what, 5 weeks since the last talks? 5 weeks without any discussions to end this standoff between the owners and the players. Um, Major League Baseball was in a right mess. what is interesting is average salaries have been dropping, but top end salaries have been going up. So there's a wage imbalance in the league. There's a spending imbalance in the league, and there are clearly issues within the league structures itself, the economics, etc., etc. And what I find really interesting about Major League Baseball in comparison to the other major league sports in North America, wearing a baseball hat here, is there's no salary cap. They have a luxury tax instead, which uh, is what it says on the tin. So there's no salary cap, um, unlike the other major league sports. And Major League Baseball is a league that has been dogged by issues of scandal and player unrest for decades. The fact that they haven't had a lockout or a strike in 25 years is beyond me. Um, and the issues have just been allowed to rumble on with patchwork CBAs since the mid 90s. And it has now reached a point where I can't see any negotiations happening anytime soon. And Major League Baseball is at risk of losing fans quickly. They've already got an aging, declining fan base anyway. The fan base actually is smaller now than what it was 25 years ago. The average fan is older than average sports fans anyway. So Major League Baseball is at a crossroads. It needs to come to a solution soon, and they need to negotiate in good faith, but neither side is negotiating in good faith. And the only proposal put on the table is expanding the playoffs. That I have seen reported is a proposal to expand the playoffs from its current format to a larger format, which is basically designed to increase revenue for team owners. Um, that in itself is a problematic issue. But the fact there's been no talks for over 5 weeks in itself tells you the problems that Major League Baseball is currently facing. There's a lack of negotiating in good faith. There's been basically distrust between the Players Association and the owners for decades. We're going back to the 70s. That's like 40, nearly 50 years ago of mistrust between the playing group and the owners. So there's issues there. Plus, this is a sport that's been beset by scandal for generations, with the steroid scandal, still recovering from that, the sign stealing scandal, so on-field cheating to win, um, deliberate tanking, and the ongoing lack of a salary cap, on top of the other economic issues that are in play. The situation with Major League Baseball is not a good one, and this is a league that is now at risk of losing fans to other sports leagues, not only in the US and Canada but overseas, um, and therefore affecting revenues long term. Because if you've got less fans watching, you're going to have to put ticket prices up, which is going to price fans out, which it becomes a revolving cycle of reducing attendances, shrinking fan base, and when you've got leagues like Major League Soccer rapidly expanding, growing rapidly, growing as a product, uh, new teams joining, new fans, that is a concern in itself. So they are at risk of losing further fans and fans switching off and just going, I've had enough of this. I want to put my hard earned money into another sport. And that is a problem. And then you've got to look at their London series and how it didn't really go that well, in my personal opinion, when they came over here, being the last of the major leagues to come to Europe to host regular season or preseason games. Really behind the curveball on that one. Um, the NBA, the NFL, and NHL have been far ahead in taking games to Europe and the UK. Their London series wasn't great. Got very mixed reviews, and they came at the time when the Rugby Cricket World Cup was on. Kidderminster Harriers. I remember when they were actually in the Football League at one point. My dad used to live near Kidderminster, so I've been to their little ground. I think it's a good thing. I think it's a positive. It's a massive cash injection for the Kidderminster Harriers as a non-league club. Massive, massive boost financially for them. I forget who they were playing. I've got to see who they're playing now. Now I've got to look at the scores from yesterday. It's like Cambridge United as well. It's what the FA Cup's all about. The underdog story. The boost to their finances is massive. Absolutely massive boost to their finances. got to see who they were playing, actually. I've actually got this in my notebook. Hang on 1 second. Who were Kidderminster playing? Who were they playing? I'm now looking at my notebook now. God, but they were playing Reading. Reading are not playing well at the moment. Reading have got some off-field issues as well, which are long-standing. They've already had a points deduction this season. There's some off-field dramas with Reading. They've had a COVID outbreak, so they've got a lot of games stacked up. They've got to play in the Championship. I think it's a statement from Kidderminster as well. That the lower leagues and the non-league do have some talented players playing in their ranks who could play at a higher level. I've said that with nearly every FA Cup review I've done over the last couple of years. Is like some of these players I've seen play could definitely play at a higher level. There is a lot of talent in the lower levels of the game that gets overlooked. But Reading have got off-field issues with their ownership, points deduction. They've had a COVID outbreak before Christmas. They've got games that they've got to play. They've got some fixture congestion. They could be sucked into the relegation battle in the Championship. So it's not all going well at Reading. It's been a bit of a basket case behind the scenes since John Medeski sold the club. It's an interesting one. I think when the lower league or non-league clubs pull off a shock in the third round, it does create a lot of headlines. I mean, look, we've got some potential cup shocks today in the games that are being played today as well. So it's like Cambridge United yesterday beating Newcastle. That 1-0. Their goalkeeper had the game of his life. Yeah, I mean, look, my dad used to work in Redditch. He used to live just south of Redditch himself, in Alvechurch. So I know the area very, very well. Worcestershire and Warwickshire and that kind of, and Shropshire, that kind of area around around the area. I know the area quite well. My dad lived up there for the best part of 15 years of his life before he passed away. So I used to go up to near Redditch quite a bit. My dad used to live and work in Redditch. Technically in Alvechurch, but his postal address said Redditch when we used to send him mail and stuff for Christmas and birthdays. So I know the area. I have been to Kidderminster. It's not necessarily the most attractive town in the world, but it's an interesting part of the world. The Kidderminster Harriers. I mean, they are in the non-league. They do deserve to be in the Football League. I think they have been in the Football League in their history. If they were to make the Football League, I think that would be a massive boost for the area. But the West Midlands gets overlooked as a footballing area in this country. You just look at the clubs in the West Midlands and the history they have in the game and the importance they have in the game. Wolves, Aston Villa, Birmingham City, West Brom. And then you have got clubs like Kidderminster Harriers and Walsall who get overshadowed by their bigger neighbours in the West Midlands. Oh, right. Now, which Premier League winning captain used to play for them? Because there's quite a few ex-Premier League winning captains who've played in the lower levels of the game. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say possibly Tim Sherwood. I could be wrong. Wes Morgan, there you go. But that's an interesting one. I thought Tim Sherwood, but because he's played all over the place. But there you go. I mean, Wes Morgan coming through the non-league, playing around the Midlands area, both East and West Midlands, with Nottingham Forest and Leicester and places like that. And that is important. The non-league is very, very important to the football pyramid. And what we saw last season with the chaos with the COVID pandemic, this time last year, with games getting cancelled left, right, and centre, league play basically being suspended, Dover Athletic unable to complete the season. Concerns with League One and League Two with salary caps being put on the table, and then the debate about a rescue package for the Football League from the Premier League, and the Premier League trying to basically be as greedy as possible. The non-league is so vitally important to the football pyramid. Without the non-league, you don't have Jamie Vardy, Ricky Lambert, Grant Holt, Wes Morgan. These guys have played in the Premier League. I mean, Wes Morgan and Jamie Vardy have won the Premier League and the FA Cup and the Charity Shield. Grant Holt Ian Wright started out in the non-league before going to Palace and then ending up at Arsenal and playing in multiple FA Cup finals and scoring in multiple FA Cup finals. So without the non-league, you don't have the structures in place, the pyramid in place for player development, for talent spotting, because players like Wes Morgan and Jamie Vardy were written off as players. Grant Holt was written off. Ricky Lambert was written off. They were told they were never going to make it. Okay, now Grant Holt is the sixth highest goal scorer for Norwich in their records. Okay, Norwich is a historical club, sixth highest on their goal scoring tally overall. Ricky Lambert ended up playing for England. Jamie Vardy, playing for England, winning trophies. Without the non-league, you don't have that talent pathway. There's a lot of good players playing in the non-league. A lot of good players playing in the non-league who either were let go by academies and told they weren't good enough, or never went to academies and literally just started playing, part-time. And, in my opinion, without the non-league, you don't have the Football League structure. If the non-league starts failing and clubs start going bust, the Football League suffers as a result. And, we saw with what happened with Bury, the impact that had on League One finances. It did. It honestly did. It exacerbated the COVID pandemic, I honestly believe, for League One clubs. Liverpool, Man City, who plays better football? Well, Man City have obviously had a more dominant decade, but I think Liverpool, I like their style of play. I prefer Liverpool's style of play, but Man City, it's a difficult one because they're both equally successful clubs. Liverpool have obviously had more success over a longer period of time, but Klopp versus Guardiola is a very interesting matchup. But the Liverpool style, actually, when they're playing against Man City with full strength sides, Liverpool win. That's the difference in style, is the way Liverpool play. And other clubs play similar to Liverpool as well. If you get it right and you have the right pieces in play and a full strength squad, you can beat Man City. There are glaring weaknesses with Man City that are very obvious and were actually highlighted in the game against Swindon Town. Just Swindon Town played into Man City's hands by overplaying themselves at the back and being very naive. But when they got it right and they scored their goal, they highlighted the weaknesses that Man City had. The fact they were already 3-0 down was their own fault. But on the night, Man City didn't convincingly outplay Swindon Town. There are glaring weaknesses with Man City. I'm surprised Premier League clubs don't look at non-league and lower league. They do. They do. There are some diamonds in the rough in the non-league and lower leagues. But the problem is the obsession with getting the big money transfers in, and what I call the mercenary players, and the lack of developing from within. A lot of clubs do develop from within quite well, and then they get their best players poached because they just cannot afford to keep them. And that is the problem with the football pyramid right now: is there is too much money weighted at the top in a handful of clubs, and the trickle down effect, the trickle down economics, so to speak, isn't actually working as well as it should. Which is why you see a lot of Premier League and Championship clubs sending out a lot of their players out on loan to lower league clubs, and they can recall them at any time, which is a problem with the loan system. They Premier League clubs and Championship clubs do look at the lower leagues. They do. It's a great learning nursery for young players, and senior players who are nearing the end of their careers can still contribute to the game and help develop teams and help teams develop and learn winning ways and good habits. So we have seen some brilliant ex Premier League and Championship players who end up playing in the lower leagues and doing very, very well. And winding down their careers. When people say, "Oh, they're done. They shouldn't play anymore. They should quit." Well, actually, they still have a love for the game, and they're playing for the love of the game. Those that play on into their late 30s generally have a love for the game, and aren't those mercenary type players. You wouldn't see a Messi or a Ronaldo type level of player playing in the lower levels of the game. You just wouldn't. But other players have happily graced the lower levels of the game after they've peaked, and they still want to play. They still want to contribute. And when they're going down the levels and they're playing, they end up getting like player coaches. They learn to get their coaching badges while they're still playing. It's a slower pace of game. It's a slightly slower pace of game, so they can still contribute. So Wayne Rooney ending up at Derby was not a bad thing. People go, "Oh, his career's done." Well, he's now a manager, so there you go. Ronaldo, yeah, no, he didn't look great at the Euros. I'm not going to deny that. He looked really poor. I mean, yeah, he got a lot of goals at the Euros from the penalty spot, but Portugal were poor, and Ronaldo just he's not a two-way player anymore. And he looked second best. He was easily defended against. But then you've got to look at, okay, I wouldn't say he shouldn't be playing top level football. I think it's when you've got to build a team around him rather than being part of a team and working in a system, um, which I think is actually harming United. But Edison Cavani, however, has kept fitter. Is still able to do a two-way game, um, and hasn't declined as quickly as Ronaldo, even though they're roughly the same age. Um, yeah, well, we've got to wait and see what happens with these playoffs. We had the question earlier about Italy or Portugal. Who misses out? There's several big nations that have got right through the playoff structure to make the World Cup or not make the World Cup. Um, I know you don't like talking politics. What's your thought on the Chester FC and their stadium situation regarding? I'm assuming that's COVID rules. I haven't really. I don't really know what's going on at Chester Football Club, but honestly, I don't know enough about the situation to have a comment. It's something I haven't really. I don't look at every single footballing story, every single sporting story, because I just do not have the time of day to do it at the moment. Um, if there is a stadium situation regarding, yeah, I think it's because half the stadium is in Cheshire and half the stadium is in Wales or something, and that becomes a political minefield, especially if I haven't read enough of the situation to know what's going on. But from the sounds of it, it's a mess because Wales have different rules to England because devolved health administration. It's like when we had the tier system last year. Um, you know, uh, where I live, within 500 meters, I'm in a different local authority. Um, and within like half a mile, I'm in a different county. Like I'm really right on the edge of several local authorities. So when like how do I put it? When the tier system was brought in last year and we had crowd restrictions in one location but not in another, um, that was haphazard. Um, in regards to Chester, I mean that of course the club itself has gone bust and been reformed. So the club has had precarious finances for years, and it's a brand new club. It's not the original Chester City Football Club, but they the planning obviously to have the stadium overlapping a border is ridiculous, um, and because different levels of local government in the UK got different COVID rules, it's going to be ridiculous. Uh, so when it comes to match days, do they have a Welsh police force or or an English police force doing the match day, or do they split it because it's in two jurisdictions? It's ridiculous. Um, so whoever gave the planning application to have that in two local authorities is ridiculous. On both sides of a border is ridiculous. Um, that then the whole thing is a mess. But I don't know enough about the situation. All I know is that the Welsh government have different COVID protocols in place for COVID restrictions than the English government or the rest of within England because of devolved government. Um, Same in Scotland. So if you're like I say a Gretna fan, I mean, I think one of their ends of the old Gretna Stadium, Berwick, Berwick Rangers, who are actually a club in Northumberland, play in the Scottish League system. So it creates a lot of headaches. You've got four Welsh clubs that play in the English Football League system in Wrexham. We play the non-league at the moment, but Wrexham, Newport County, Swansea, and Cardiff, and that creates its own headaches as well. So there's a lot of headaches with various things. Um, it does create a lot of logistical headaches. I don't know how Chester are coping, quite honestly. Um, an issue of partly the club's making by when they put in the application for the stadium where they're going to build it. So that's down with the planning application for the stadium itself, and then the fact that it sort of is on two sides of an internal border, which you've got different regulations on one side, different regulations on another. Same legal system, by the way. So when it comes down to match day policing, is it the Welsh police? Is it the English police? Even though they have the same legal system they work under, so it shouldn't pose too much of a problem. But at the same time, it is a bit of a shambolic situation that all parties need to put their hand up and say we've fouled up. You could quite easily put an exemption in there, because everyone who's going to the game is coming from England. So the match day police are from Cheshire, not a constabulary from Wales, which I believe would be Flintshire. I think would be the police force involved. So in that regard, the whole thing is shambolic. They could put it for an exemption to be covered under English COVID rules, because technically everyone there's these grey areas that become a mess. In regards to the situation, there needs to be better discussion and a bit of common sense, but common sense is sadly lacking at the moment. It's common sense is something that doesn't exist at the moment, it seems. But again, the Welsh clubs that play in the English league system, for example, like Cardiff, Swansea, Wrexham, and Newport, they're obviously, when they're playing at home, are under, the Welsh restrictions of the Welsh devolved government, the Welsh Assembly. When they're playing away, their fans are under English restrictions. But does that mean away fans can travel? It's very interesting, and this is the problem with the politics side of it, and devolved governments and different legislation for different areas. I mean, the Welsh legal system is the English legal system. They operate under the same legal principles when it comes to policing in courts. So it's just I'll have to do a video of devolution in the UK and what it actually means, because it's a mess. And the Chester City Stadium situation, whoever was in the planning department at Cheshire County Council was a bit of a bellend, and whoever was in the planning department of the neighbouring council in Wales is a bit of a dimwit, because you've put a stadium on over two policing areas as well. So when it comes to match day, I don't think it's just English police. I think it's also Welsh police have to police their end of the stadium. Now it's become a political debate, which is what I wanted to avoid if at all possible. But I think there's the situation. The situation in regards to the Chester Stadium situation is quite honestly ridiculous. Whoever gave planning permission to build a stadium over two countries is definitely a moron. But at the end of the day, part of the fault lies with devolved governments and a lack of common sense. Sometimes you have to work with common sense, but unfortunately, during this pandemic and before it, common sense has been severely lacking for a long time. Yeah, well, again, they could have applied for an exemption to be under English rules, and it's a lack of common sense. And unfortunately, Chester Football Club has had issues. Well, the former football, the pre-runners, this current, Chester FC, have gone bust and all sorts, and were in the Football League and fell out of the Football League, and it all went tits up. The fact that it's been allowed to get to this stage is ridiculous. You need to talk. There's been a lack of communication, and this is something that I think stems back to the beginning of the pandemic when play was suspended. And I'm going to go a bit off the stage situation with in regards to Chester. As soon as play was suspended, and in March 2020, so again, nearly 2 years ago. It's mad, isn't it? The last 22 months, when play was initially suspended 2 years ago, and discussions about resumption to play, and there were talks about null and voiding the season, and then we had discussions about supporting the lower league clubs through financial aid, and then the non-league got grants and loans, and how the support network being put in place. The fact that whoever, like, the planning side of things. So I don't think it's necessarily the club's fault. They wanted a stadium built, and whoever gave granting the planning application, they really fouled up the fact that part of the stadium is in Wales. That the whole thing is a mess. You get administrative oversights, and then you get like foul ups like this. But common sense needs to prevail, and unfortunately, it's not. And I would say Chester, as registered as an English company, with the majority of the stadium in England, yeah, I think they have a cause to appeal what's going on. You couldn't make this up. It's like a faulty. It's like a Monty Python sketch. It's so surreal. You couldn't make it up. It's actually funny, and I shouldn't be laughing but what we've seen throughout the entire pandemic when it comes to sport is a complete lack of sense, and it has also exposed the bad governance that has been in place for so long, not just in football, but you look at rugby union, you look at rugby league's in a mess, complete and utter shambles. You look at all the sports impacted, and yeah, it is a complete and utter shambles from top to bottom, and it has been for a very, very long time. And the lack of common sense, and the fact that different parts of the UK have different rules, it is ridiculous. And but I look through the history of the pandemic when they were, when the big Premier League clubs were like, we're going to furlough our non-playing staff because we can't afford to pay them, and then within 6 months to a year, we're looking at some of the big transfers they made, and I thought, well, that's just ridiculous. Um, we'll see what happens, but Chester Football Club has had to reform more than once. A lot of financial issues. You know, the I don't know enough about the situation with Chester. I knew the ground was, over Welsh English border, which I found ridiculous. Um, but a situation like this requires common sense to police it, and they're going by stupid. There's no common sense. The people running countries right now are lacking common sense severely, and it's doing more harm than good. Just govern with common sense here. It's plain and simple. Just use common sense and go, right. Okay, we'll make an exemption for that part of the stadium. We'll class that as part of England. It doesn't take a genius to work out, just because there'll be legal challenges to this, and the pressure currently being aimed at the governing parties of the UK as a whole, Scotland and Wales is they are under a lot of scrutiny, and there's a lot of scrutiny of them right now. Every foul up they make, and the bigger this story gets, the more embarrassing it becomes, and the more damaging it becomes for the local councils involved who signed off on the build of this this stadium. So that's Cheshire County Council. Or the local authority. I don't know how if Cheshire is actually broken up into local authorities or not, but Cheshire County Council gets egg on its face and makes it look very, very silly. Their planning department looks ridiculous. Then, the lack of common sense on both sides of the border becomes ridiculous. But look who we got in charge of the country, for Christ's sake. And look at the Welsh devolved government and the Scottish devolved governments and the mistakes they've been making as well. The political class is not very popular right now. If we're being brutally honest, they're not overly popular with the public. Anyone with half a brain will go, this. And then they're trying to like move the Welsh Six Nation games to England, because they can't have fans in the stadium. It Sport should not be a political minefield. Professional sport should not be a political minefield. However, over the last few years, it has become that political minefield. And I saw the Millwall game yesterday. The booing before the game. And the commentators trying to, put their middle class kind of, just it, it, it. There's a reason why the pre-match ritual now of taking a knee or whatever. Certain players are like, I'm not doing anymore because it's lost all meaning. There's already the various community initiatives that clubs have, and there's already the Kick It Out campaign, and it's lost its meaning. It's become more divisive than unifying, and a lot of players are like, I don't want to do this, but the club are saying I've got to do it. So, and then when an individual player on a team doesn't do it, they get a load of hate, and when a team does it, they get a lot of hate. The political minefield it's become. That was one thing I was very proud of as a sports fan in this country, is we didn't allow politics to get into our into our sport, but unfortunately it has. And now we're discussing, diplomatic boycotts of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, and it's becoming more of a circus every day, professional sport. And football, for me, I've lost a lot of love for the sport over the last decade or so. As I've got older, I've enjoyed it less, for a variety of reasons. And I might do a video on my favourite sports. And football just has definitely gone down the pecking order. Definitely gone down the pecking order. Some of this, I mean, the Millwall Palace game, both sets of fans were lobbing missiles at players throughout the game. So, and I'm really surprised there's less, and we've seen more of it at league games as well, and there's less of an outrage at it. You know, there were flares lobbed on the pitch. There were, bottles lobbed at players, coins lobbed at players. That's just Millwall for you. But it's been happening across, the leagues, and it's not just an English problem. It's been happening in Europe as well. There was I think, I can't remember if it was at the Euros or not. French fans were lobbing bottles at their players when France were playing really poorly in the Euros this summer. I don't know. I haven't heard anything from Palace or Millwall players and the clubs putting in complaints about the behaviour of fans. Normally, by now, it'd be all over the press that a complaint has been made by a player or the coaching staff in regards to something that's happened, an incident that's happened. So, as far as I know, there's been no complaint lodged by Palace or Millwall. And that was tame. If that was Millwall, West Ham, or Chelsea Millwall, that would have been an absolute bloodbath. It really would have been a bloodbath. or even Millwall Charlton would have been quite nasty. And yeah, there's been a lot of disorder in French football, a lot of disorder. And again, the mainstream press doesn't really want to talk about it. Crowd disorder. And I think the first match of the season there was, I think it was it Lille Rennes or something like that, and there was pitch invasions and fights on the pitch and players getting attacked. Was it Nice? Was it Nice Marseille? I think it was Nice Marseille. There was definite um, disorder, and it's been on social media, but the mainstream media isn't doing any reporting on it. Um, but then again, our press, our sports press, and our mainstream press are pretty vile anyway. The you know the, yeah, our mainstream press. I'm so glad that my TV isn't plugged in. I no longer read newspapers. I'm so glad I don't really consume that much mainstream news media anymore. Because when anything, if something like that happened, like you know, um, yeah, the Marseille Lyon, I remember that as well. That was quite, yeah. France has an issue, and their media are. I don't know if on what their media report on it and how they report on it, but the international sports media doesn't really seem to care. Um, they don't really seem to care. Um, and yes, we had the disorder at the Euros final, which was disappointing. But yeah, the disorder in France happens on a daily every weekend. There's disorder, and I don't know how the French press report it. Maybe they've just got so numb to it, and the fans and regular fans got so numb to it, they just see it as an everyday occurrence, and they don't really, how do I put it? They don't really. They're just so indifferent to it now because it's so an everyday occurrence. But I do remember an article in the Italian press in the Gazzetta dello Sport, um, about 2007, and of course my cousins are half Italian, and they were talking about rugby and football and the difference in fans, and they said, why can't football fans be more like rugby fans? Good natured, good atmosphere, but they go home and they behave themselves. Why can't football fans be like rugby fans? And that was it after a lot of crowd disorder at Italian games that season. Um, and they were doing a comparison of rugby fans when the internationals are on and club games are on, and across Europe they did a study, and they go, why can't football fans be like rugby fans? Good natured, they may drink a lot, but they're good fun, good atmosphere. Occasionally the odd issue with the odd drunken disorder, but basically they behave themselves. Why can't football fans be like, rugby fans? There was a big article, there's a big media piece. And Gazzetta dello Sport is like required reading in Italian sports media. It's the pink newspaper. It is quite literally the go-to for Italian sports news. It doesn't matter what sport it is. Gazzetta dello Sport is the pink sports newspaper. It's the most famous sports newspaper in the world, in my opinion. Um, and Yeah, I would say this. It's not a national problem. It is a culture within the sport that the North Americans are going to realise when North American fans. You see all those reaction videos when they're reacting to football violence and football chants online on YouTube, and they're like, "This is insane. You'll get thrown out of the stadium in the US. The match will be abandoned." It's like, no, we play on with this kind of violence. You haven't seen us on before and after the game kicking lumps out of each other. I've been at games where that's happened, and I've got me oar in occasionally. Um, the the what North Americans fail to realize is how tribal it is over here and in South America. And when they come here and they're like they're plastic fans, like all the overseas fans, the prawn sandwich brigade and all that, the champagne brigade who sit in the box seats. They just don't realise how visceral we are, and they're in for a shock. They're in for a shock. Um, like I would happily, like, if any of my North American subscribers would love to come over, I would take you to an Aldershot game against Farnborough, like a non-league pre-season, because that ends in arrests all over the place. I would happily take, you know, well, yeah, Philly fans are just Philadelphia is just Philadelphia. Baltimore, you're lucky to get to the ground without, stadium without being shot or murdered on the way. Because Baltimore's the murder capital of the US right now, and Philadelphia, Philly fans are just, well, they're still tamed by European comparisons, but Philly is a city with a lot of social issues. Um, you know, what happened at the Euros finals was empty seats being dangled in front of desperate people should have been filled, and then a drug dealer talking. I don't know how much cocaine to take to London that day. Um, there in itself is it was like the guy doing like loads of coke on the video, pissed up and off his tits. Um, yeah, I mean the French, well, the French doing that is because cycling in the Tour de France and the Vuelta and the Giro, all the doping scandals, that was more of an anti-doping protest, and they were very angry. There were certain riders. There's been a lot of question marks over there. Are they clean? Are they riding without cheating? But yes, they did lob a lot of piss over Chris Froome. Not that I'm a fan of Chris Froome, because I do think there is some suspicions that he was doping when he was at Team Sky. I since Lance Armstrong and what happened with the Festina affair in '98, cycling fans, and I am a Tour de France fan, and I do like the Giro and the Vuelta. Um, there is a lot of question marks, over um, how clean the riders are, even now. The percentage of riders cheating now is less than what it was. It's in the minority now, but it's still there, and they haven't eradicated that problem from cycling. Um, God, so I did hear rumours that half the cocaine in the UK was in London that day, but that's just not. You wouldn't be able to move that much bulk across country if you are a drug dealer. Um, the police, you would have to have every single county line gang member in the UK from John O'Groats to Land's End to move that much gear into London. It just wouldn't happen. I think that's some people giving it the large on social media. Um, but trust me, the the organised criminals have moved not only from drugs into fraud, into setting up dummy companies to get COVID, grants from the government, then liquidate them, and then they don't pay the money back. But yes, the scenes at the Euros final, the disorder. Yeah, no. What surprised me is Lance Armstrong deciding to spill the beans on the Oprah Winfrey Show. I've watched the documentaries about it. I've watched the interview in full. I've watched the documentaries about it, the interviews he's given since, in the years since, because he's got kids who are obviously wanting to be professional athletes as well. Um, and I've watched the interviews he's given. And what is very, very interesting is one of the interviewers asked him, "So if you were a pro cyclist today, would you dope?" He said no. And the reasoning behind it was there are too many clean riders now. You won't get away with it. Um, and I think the percentage of riders in the peloton that are doping now is around 10 to 20%. When Lance Armstrong is going, it's around 80 to 85%. And I've seen interviews given by ex teammates and ex rivals as well. And it's basically the same thing. The culture has to change within a sport. And pro cycling, the culture is changing, not enough. Um, um, well, look, we've come back to UEFA FIFA not wanting us to have the World Cup and that bollocks. We were bidding for the World tournament before this tournament. We weren't interested in this Euros tournament. We didn't have a bid for this Euros tournament. And when UEFA came and said it's a pan-European tournament, um, they said they're not going to do that again. I will say this: the scenes at the final weren't the worst I've seen, but they weren't good viewing. Let's be honest on that. The it just it was embarrassing. Yes, we got but then you're gonna get all the negative comments. Oh, it's women's football. Record viewership figures. More and more people, especially men, are watching women's sport. Um, and it is the minority on social media who give them crap. It is, and unfortunately, there's a Facebook group I'm a member of, the fans of the Alan Brazil Sports Breakfast, and it seems to be all the dinosaurs seem to be on some of these fan groups online on social media, basically slagging off the women's game. If you don't like it, don't watch it. That's quite easy solution. If you don't like something, don't watch it rather than get complained. Um, well, look, the club football and international football, there's a whole variety of things at play. Obviously, the European Super League argument is not going to look good because half the teams involved were English. In regards to that was Roma. That was Roma against Man United about a decade ago. And B&Q did sell out of hammers and axes. It was quite surprising. Um, Yes, in regards if we were, I think it's a no-brainer. I think it makes logical economic sense to have either a Euros or a World Cup here because the infrastructure is in place, and that was the whole point behind the Milton Keynes Stadium was it could be expanded for any potential bid. Um, who on earth turns up to a football match with mechanical tools? A thug, um, an ultra, a hooligan. I've seen various. I mean, yesterday at the Millwall Palace game, they had security barriers in place to prevent people smuggling things in, yet flares still were brought into the stadium. So the security checks were a joke. So that worked that out. Yeah, I mean, this is a long-standing issue. There was that Liverpool fan who was left with brain damage after a game a few years back. I don't think he's fully recovered either. He was in a coma for a long time. Um, but we have this reputation, which unfortunately is very difficult to shake. But again, I go back to the Gazette dello Sport article from about 13, 14 years ago, and they were saying, why can't football fans be like rugby fans and motorsport fans, like other sports fans? Does football have this issue? Why can't it clear it? And it was more of an attack across the whole continent, not just England, not just Italy. It was an attack across the whole continent of the hooligan ultra kind of tribal element to it. And it was a very scathing attack. It was a very lengthy article, and I read the English translation because the Gazette dello Sport does have an English version, which you can read online. And it was literally just a scathing attack for about a 20-minute article, which you read, basically saying football is not really dealing with this problem and has not dealt with this problem for decades. Um, and ev- the fines that clubs get, Nicholas Bentner at Euro 2012 got fined more, right, for his Paddy Power boxers because they were an unofficial sponsor. I think he got fined like €200,000 or something. He got fined more than the Bulgarian FA for the Bulgarian FA Cup final, where CSK Sofia and I think Red Star Sofia had a riot. He got fined more as an individual than an FA for crowd disorder. That tells you all you need to know. The various FAs getting stadium closures and stadium bans because of crowd disorder are fined less than an individual player having a pair of joke boxers on because one of his personal sponsors wasn't allowed at a tournament because it wasn't a tournament official sponsor. He got fined more than than nations and clubs that misbehave with racism, homophobic. So how many partial stadium bans have Celtic and Rangers had for sectarian chanting and sectarian related hooliganism? It's ridiculous. They get in trouble all the time, yet their fines are pitiful, absolutely pitiful. You know, it really sums up where football is at when it's more concerned about an unauthorized sponsor on a player than crowd violence and racism in the sport. Right? It tells you, and yeah, Hungary's had loads. it's had stadium bans and stuff. But the fines dished out to the clubs, the nations, and etc., ironically, are less than what Nicholas Bentner was fined for his Euro 2012 Paddy Power boxes. That in itself tells you all you need to know where football's priorities are at, right? An unauthorised sponsor on a player, right? Or 60,000 fans lobbing missiles, hurling racist abuse, and, trying to start a riot in a stadium in Budapest. I will give them a stadium ban for a couple of weeks, but this player's fined like a week's wages, which in his term was like 200 grand a week. But you get what I'm saying. The individual player, for having a bit of a laugh, right, is fined more than the Hungarian FA. Like, you couldn't make this up. Like, yes, the lost revenue by having a stadium closure is going to impact their revenue stream. Fine. But when you've got, like, clubs being fined for crowd disorder being less than what a player is fined for doing something, it tells you all you need to know about football's priorities, because they know the clubs making the money. If they hurt them too much, the FAs make less money. They've got to have their fair cut. Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce. Who would lob their house keys? And how would you get back into your apartment? You're like, I can't. I get. Please, I cannot get back in. I've lost my keys. No, you've keyed a player in the head. And like, it's like when Figo had the pig's head thrown at him. The I can't remember if he went to Barcelona, Real Madrid, but the fans lobbed a pig's head. How they got a whole fucking pig's head into the new camp is beyond me. And then they started lobbing their mobile phones. It's like, you are aware they can track your mobile phone history by your SIM card. Really, unless they're all burner phones. They were lobbing mobile phones at him, right? And this is back in the day when a Nokia 3310 was like 120 euros or something for a handset. Back in the day, you work with inflation. They were expensive phones at the time. They're lobbing their mobile phones at him, right? And, yesterday they still managed to get flares into the stadium. Yet they had security checks outside the ground because they knew that this was a high-profile, very high volatile fixture. The Palace Millwall game. They still got flares into the stadium. So explain how that security check worked. Like the well, CONMEBOL and UEFA are against this 2-year World Cup cycle, right? They've come up very, very clearly and said, no, we're against it. And can you imagine the World Cup without Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, England, Germany, Italy, Spain, Holland? Well, Holland haven't always qualified for the World Cup, but these big nations, can you imagine these big nations not being at the World Cup? How flat that tournament would be and how the viewership figures would plummet. This is why the 2-year World Cup cycle will not get passed. When the two most powerful nation blocks, where all the World Cup winners have come from, by the way, just putting it out there, are basically saying, we're against it, we will boycott. And when you've got nations within those nation blocks saying, we're going to boycott anyway, right, if this goes ahead. And then the rest of those nation blocks backing up. The Scandinavian nations said, well, we've started a trend here. And what is funny is UEFA and CONMEBOL have basically said, no, we'll support Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Faroe Islands, Finland, Iceland, we'll support them. I don't. A pan, a South American, European international tournament would be amazing, because that's pretty much the World Cup. That's where your World Cup finalists come from. The fact that they've already started discussions in regards to planning a boycott, planning a withdrawal from FIFA, I think FIFA will look at that and go, we now can't sell the World Cup. Because ironically, let's say 2030, the bidding process, a European co-host, let's say England and let's say the UK and Ireland do get to co-host the 2030 World Cup, and then we go, oh, by the way, we're going to be boycotting your tournament because you put this 2-year cycle in place and we voted against that. We're now boycotting. Oh, by the way, you give us the hosting rights. Have fun finding a couple of nations who've got the infrastructure in place to put a tournament on at such short notice. But that's basically what would happen. Now, I'm not saying a nations league like that would actually be good. because of the travel issues with South America and logistical issues. However, the threat that the two biggest associations of nations, the two most powerful power brokers within the global game, historically are saying, all the World Cup winners come from our two federations. We're going to pull out of your tournament. It completely destroys, the FIFA World Cup. It annihilates it. Completely destroys it. Now, that should be a warning sign to FIFA, a massive warning sign to FIFA. Absolutely. There is. These are the best nations in the world saying we're not happy with your proposal, and I think FIFA needs to take it seriously. The fact the associations that are backing them are Asia and Africa, which should be no surprise with all the corruption there. Go down swimmingly. There's no cynicism in my voice. Tells you all you need to know that Well, yeah, well, when you've got former play, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are massive social problems in South America, massive inequality in South America. But on a footballing standpoint, historically, Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay have won the World Cup. They've hosted the World Cup, right? The rest of the winners have come from Europe. Now, obviously, the US and Canada want to grow the game over there. They get the World Cup in 4 years' time. That's fine. But I think a lot of North American fans don't want a 2-year World Cup cycle because they also like watching the Euros and the Copa America in South America. They like watching these historical tournaments, and they like watching the European South American football. That's why. So the North American fans were against the European Super League. Ironically, the team owners may be North American from the US and Canada. They were against it outright. They joined ranks with the European fans saying to the European Super League. And so, because they understand and respect the history and the culture and the importance of the sport historically and socially in South America and Europe. In regards to the fact that the South American nations and the UEFA are now having meetings and discussions going against FIFA, that is really interesting, and therefore that creates a new dynamic with this proposal for a 2-year World Cup cycle. I don't think it happens because we've seen arguments about having a European Super League for 30 years. It's never happened. The closest we got was it collapsing within 48 hours before a ball was even kicked. And instead of getting concessions from UEFA, they got punished by UEFA. And very, very quickly, the clubs were like, we're going to get a lot of heat for this. We're going to, our public image is being damaged by this. If we continue with this, the PR disaster it would be and the damage to our brand is going to hurt us. And then the fact that, Barcelona and Real Madrid and Juventus, they're already in a disaster mode anyway because they've got no money. They've been mismanaged for so long that they're in a position. Well, yeah, I think the winners of the Euros and the winners of the Copa America should play each other in a one-off. That'd be brilliant. But again, like the best South American players play in Europe, and so therefore there's definite pressure now on FIFA to listen to the major nations that drive the game. And don't get me wrong, I love the Africa Cup of Nations because it's brilliant because there's no defending whatsoever. It's very open, attractive football. It really is fun. But the quality is not at the same level, and the skill level is not on the same level as the South Americans and the Europeans. It's not. But I do like watching the Africa Cup of Nations. It is fun when you can watch it. But I would say that football needs reform. There are ways to reform the international and club calendars. Now, I could do a video on how I would do it, and it might be very interesting because I think there's too much money in the game and it's not distributed evenly. There's too much corruption out there. Just one of the reasons why I enjoyed the sport less now than what I did when I was 22, right? 23, 24. I was exceptionally passionate about the sport when I was a kid and a teenager and in my early 20s. And now that I'm in my early 30s, I've lost that enjoyment. I've lost the joy of it. I've lost the passion for it. I'm really not feeling a connection to the sport that I loved for so long. Um, if South America do agree to join the Nations League, that becomes interesting because the Nations League is designed in regards to Euros and World Cup qualifying for the European nations. So that makes it very interesting because South America only has 13 nations in their qualification uh, group because Guyana and Suriname technically qualify through the Caribbean and French Guiana is part of France. So um, two of the South American nations on the continent qualify for the North American Central American tournament. So in that regard, you've got the Latin American contingent of South America. It's going to be interesting if that does go ahead because that does actually honestly impact World Cup and Euros qualification for the European nations. But with the tournament expanding after this World Cup, it might be a very plausible possibility to tweak South American qualifying as well. We will see. There's a lot of hurdles in place logistically, but the best South American players play in Europe, so it shouldn't be too hard to assemble an Argentinian team or a Brazilian team or a Uruguayan team to play, for example. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with the logistics side of it. But that is basically the CONMEBOL and UEFA saying to FIFA, right, okay, we'll just set up our own, global tournament then, and to hell with you. And that undermines FIFA's authority. And you know, FIFA have to be careful how they tread because if they piss off the power brokers, the power nations, which these are the top nations, the European and South American nations are the best nations in the world. The players, the history, the tournaments, the quality. It really makes a mockery out of the World Cup. And FIFA are now on the back foot because they're the two most powerful unions within FIFA. And if they decide, you know, associations, I say, groupings within FIFA, if they decide to break away, the TV rights are going to follow them because the best players play in South America and Europe and represent the European and South American countries. That's where the best players play. That's the best quality football. Um, and that will tell you what you need to know about where we're going with future World Cups and the future of the game. I've got nothing wrong with expanding the World Cup. I've got nothing against necessarily, trying to grow the game, grow the quality, and improve the quality in Asia and Africa and the Middle East and Australasia and North America. Nothing against that. But we've had a World Cup in the US before, and it was crap. It was the worst World Cup I've ever seen. And any football fan will tell you the '94 World Cup was absolutely appalling in comparison to Mexico '86, which was also held in the North American continent, and Mexico 1970. In comparison, the World Cup in '94 was the worst tournament in the modern era. Uh, South Africa was a semi-close second. But when your best players are from South America and Europe, and your best nations are in South America and Europe, and you are basically saying to FIFA, we are threatening to boycott your potential two-year World Cup cycle, that kills the plan, in my opinion. Kills it. It does kill it. Stone dead. It does. It's one of the few times we've seen footballing unity within international football. Unity on a organisational level within football. And yeah, there's corruption within the game. I'm not saying South Americans and Europeans are exempt from that, but it is showing that FIFA cannot just come up with these ideas without consulting member states of the organisation. And FIFA are now on the back foot. If this does go ahead and they push ahead with this is us saying, well, we'll form our own tournament then without you, and we'll devalue your major moneymaker. We still have our Copa America and Euros. And then the World Cup falls flat. When your biggest nations are not participating, because the interest shown in the Euros and then the Copa America this summer was mad. And don't get me wrong, I love watching the Africa Cup of Nations. I always have. I've really enjoyed the tournament in the past. Like, it's nice watching like smaller nations, compete at a major tournament. I would still like to watch the World Cup because I like to see all the best nations in the world. But I like the regional tournaments, like the Africa Cup of Nations, like the Euros, like the Copa America. I really enjoy watching them. It's fun to watch them because it's a very open tournament. The style of play being played, it's nice to see smaller nations make it to a major tournament, especially those regional ones, and then the best end up going to the World Cup. And you want to see the best players play. Would I rather? I would still rather watch the World Cup simply because it's every 4 years. You've got a 4-year cycle. On saying that, also that you also they want to expand it, which is fine. I've got nothing against expanding it personally. There are better ways to do it. I would have thought. But there are some quality players playing in South America and Africa who I think, without expanding, don't make it to a World Cup and play for those nations. There's always that I'm always diluting it, but I think it's actually growing the game in a positive way. And it brings new nations to the table that otherwise in past editions wouldn't have qualified, for example, by virtue of where they qualified in their group. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think expansion is always a viable option for any tournament, and growing the global reach of the game. We've had the same debate in rugby union, rugby league World Cups, cricket World Cups, Olympics for various various bits in the Olympics, World Championships. These debates are always being had. Expanding leagues, for example, are you diluting it? In the short term, yes. In the long term, you actually grow the talent pool. It is the global game. You look, even Swindon Town had a player going. Their starting goalkeeper is Ghana's starting goalkeeper in the Africa Cup of Nations. Let's put that out. That just shows the depth that international football now has and the quality international football now has. Now, in my opinion, obviously, I'm not against expanding international tournaments. Far from it. I think it's more of a good than a bad thing long term. I'm not necessarily against Tunisia and Panama being at the World Cup if they've qualified by right under the current rules. They're playing by the rules. What I would say is, they can only. Well, you've got to play what's in front of you, and unfortunately, we didn't play well enough in the 2018 World Cup. We just weren't ruthless enough. I wouldn't say they were horrid. I just don't think we played well enough against them. That's my personal opinion. For the quality and talent depth we have in this country, we somehow got to a semi-final, which we shouldn't have, personally, with how we played. Whereas at the Euros, we played a lot better. Now, I don't knock any nation for making a World Cup. Okay, don't. It's the pinnacle of any player's career is to make the World Cup, let alone to win it. And to say to a country you don't deserve to qualify is ridiculous. But there are ways to make sure that those teams that do qualify are capable of playing at the top level. Then you would have to look at how the qualifying groups are worked out and international breaks and other bits and pieces and the international friendly schedule, which I think needs to be completely got rid of, and just have qualifying tournaments in the off season which replicate your World Cup or your Euros or your Copa America, and that's how you do the international cycle. Yeah, again, it's how the game is developing, especially if it's not your major national sport. Panama, it's baseball, so they're trying to grow the game in that country. Um, how big is the deal with the six? There is no holiday. There is no holiday around it. The unfortunate obsession with the media and harking back to a previous generation is perverse. Um, we've been at two World Cup semi-finals, a Euro semi-final, and a Euros final since. It's our only achievement at senior level in the men's game. Um, and, I, and yeah, we were the best team in the world for a period of time. There is no holiday around it. There is the. I think it defines England's struggles in the modern era. Is we're trying to compare rather than develop and go right. Let's look forward. Um, I think the best game of all time is the 1970 group stage Brazil-England game. They were the two best nations at the time playing against each other at their peak. But very, very quickly, Brazil and England found that it was very, very difficult to replicate their previous successes. And the style of play changed, and the sport evolved. Sports finances went through ups and downs. There was issues with infrastructure and the finances and the direction the game was taking. And then post '66, well, they'd given him a contract extension, so as I say, he's got a contract extension. Like, I'm not a fan of the style of play he puts in place. Like, we set up as we are really, really good at fast-paced counter-attack, slow build-up play. You're mentioning like the issues we had against Tunisia and Panama. We're not good enough with slow build-up play. I would say this: results do speak for themselves. A semi-final and a final is progress from where we were before he took over, and I don't think Hodgson or Allardyce would have got us to where he got us. But I do think with how the team is set up and some of the tactical decisions made are showing naivety. And I think we've got the wrong guy as captain. I think Henderson should be captain for all that's worth. But again, I don't really follow what I remember in 2018 the media circus that followed Sterling and Rashford and all that, and I'm sorry, is Sterling the wrong kind of player from a minority background? Is Rashford different? I just found that too much. I'm not a fan of how the media reports things, and how they treat athletes. It doesn't matter what sport they're playing. One week they're putting on a pedestal, the next week they're knocking them down and giving them grief. The obsession with a handful of clubs as well, I think, is at the detriment to the wider game in reporting. I do think there are issues with Southgate's style of play and selections, and I was questioning the strength of the squad before the Euros. We made the final. I nearly ate my words, but I'm still not sold on the defensive side of the squad. I'm not sold on the midfield depth side of the squad. Goalkeeping, I'm not sold on either. But then again, Jack Butland's played 6 times in 18 months, so his career is completely stalled. You've got Heaton and Pope. They've had lots of injury problems. Henderson's not really having a good time at Man United at the moment, and so that leaves you with Pickford, which is a problem. And we had a moment, I think, between 2017 and this year where we had a lot of young English keepers coming through all at the same time, and now it's a bit of a mess. Well, he's been granted the extension. The FA want to keep him in there. We'll see if there's always a post tournament review of every tournament and every qualification campaign. It does give a bit of stability in the role, which I think we've tried the overseas manager, that hasn't worked twice. We've tried Steve. Again, we're looking. Well, the problem is with England is we've missed out on managers like Brian Clough. We turned him down in the 70s, which I think was a blunderous mistake. Right, and we went with Don Revie, which was just a failure in itself. And so mistakes were made post Alf Ramsey that we have never. We should have gone with Brian Clough rather than Don Revie, and that's I think where the issue with the succession plan from '66 onwards has gone with. We've so Bobby Robson was as close as we've got, I think, with the manager who suited the international football. And of course, he's now sadly passed away. But Sir Bobby Robson was a brilliant appointment. We've had Kevin Keegan there. We've had Glenn Hoddle wasn't actually a bad appointment. Obviously, his comments off the record about his religious views and views about disabled people. Obviously, yeah. I mean, Glenn Hoddle was a brilliant appointment as well. And he had some very good players, and we were playing a very attractive style. And we just lost to Argentina in that game where Beckham got sent off. But he was given a contract extension. And had Hoddle stayed with the side, we wouldn't have had the Sven experiment. I honestly don't believe that. I think, unfortunately, obviously his religious views and his views on disability. Sometimes it's best, and this is before cancel culture, by the way. Just putting it out there, this is before cancel culture. He has got a footballing mind, and at club level, okay, he wasn't the best manager at club level. There's no doubt in that. International level, he knows what it takes to play for your country, and what it takes training wise, getting the team together, the right pieces in place, and sometimes good club managers don't make good international managers, and vice versa. On the Southgate side of things, I think there's something. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right. Yes, we've got to a semi-final and a final, and the improvement is there. It's better than what came before. There is no doubt on that. Roy Hodgson was sort of thrown in after, at short notice before the 2012 Euros. He had a very limited time with that team. The World Cup was an absolute disaster in 2014, and then the 2016 Euros was not much better. And then Southgate comes along. Now, he was the best of what was available, which is terrifying. I do think there's some young, gifted managers like Graham Potter and Eddie Howe, and I do think Eddie Howe will do all right at Newcastle, given time and a bit of long-term investment, who I think could do a better job with the England side than Southgate is doing. Gary Monk, you could throw in there as well, another young England manager, English manager. Maybe Lampard or Gerrard down the line, even Wayne Rooney down the line. I honestly believe some of the young English managers right now in the game are learning at the right time. They're all young and ambitious, and only one of them is out of job, and that is Lampard. So if it does screw up with Southgate, I think Lampard is a logical choice to get in there. Graham Potter as well. Eddie Howe, given time at Newcastle, I think he can turn the situation around, but he needs time and investment. And if that means they get relegated, they get relegated. As long as he can get them back up out the Championship. If he keeps them in the Premier League, fair play to him. But these young, ambitious, young managers, I think, should be given a look in for the England job. Because I think Graham Potter is happy at Brighton. He's made no indication that he wants to leave. Eddie Howe's just started at Newcastle. He's got a very tough job on his hands, but look what he did with Bournemouth with very limited resources from when he first took over to get into the Premier League to how long he was in charge there for. Lampard, I think, still early in his managerial career, he's available if there was to be a change. And of course, he's done his coaching badges at St George's Park. He knows the system. He knows a lot of the young players from his time at Chelsea and Derby. You've got Gerrard, who's had great success at Rangers and now is doing really good things at Villa and has really turned around Aston Villa's fortune since he's been appointed. They've responded to him. You've got Gary Monk, who's available, floating around. He's a young, ambitious manager. He did a decent job at Swansea when he was there, considering the situation he was thrown into. So there are some young English managers out there. But at the moment, none of them have said any indication that they want to, get involved with the national side. Now, Rooney, if you look at his actual record at Derby, he's actually surprisingly good. It's just their points deductions are killing them. But again, he's worked within the England system. I think he is doing the right things at Derby, much like Lampard before him. Their win percentage isn't actually that bad. Most overrated player on the England side, Jadon Sancho. Sancho, I think, is not performing to his price tag, which he has. I would say any of our back four. I'm gonna say Pickford. I would say Pickford is a glaring one. Rashford's been playing with a lot of injuries, and I do think his charity work is distracting from him now. I do think post playing, Rashford's got a very, very good career in public service. Sterling, his shooting accuracy is not good enough. Be it club or country, he misses a lot of chances. So it's difficult to say which was overrated because a lot of them are very, very young. And they're still, you always learn the game. You never stop learning the game. Even the great Paolo Maldini was always learning the game. And some of the greatest players will always say, I'm learning something new every day about themselves and the game evolving. That's why Andrea Pirlo, I think, was brilliant towards the end of his career because he adapted his game because he lost his pace, which he never had to begin with. But he adapted his game to suit the style of play. Well, Andrea Pirlo is probably one of the best midfielders of his generation. You could say the same about Luis Figo. As he got older, he changed his style of play. He's young, he's raw talented, but if you look at that Man City side, that was the strongest lineup Guardiola could name. And then you look at the bench, how inexperienced that bench was. That shows that even clubs like Man City, with all the superstars they have, are starting to run out of fit players. And that's with the amount of injuries and the COVID and losing players to Africa Cup of Nations. Squad depths are being tested. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at. And I always go back to that Chesterfield Salford City game where basically a whole starting matchday squad was missing. 17 players between the two teams were not available because of injury. And it doesn't matter what level you're playing at. If you have got a whole matchday squad, so you're starting 11 plus sub bench missing from two teams, that's a third of the two squads put together was unavailable, and that was before Christmas. That was a month ago. That tells you that the squad limit rules, the sizes on limits on squad sizes are having a negative impact, a bad impact. But yes, Cole Palmer, he does look very, very gifted. He hasn't got a lot of game time, and that's a problem. And it's the same with Elise yesterday for Palace. He's barely had any game time. And so when you've got these young players, now Elise was obviously brought from Reading to Palace. But if you're looking at it for player development, the Africa Cup of Nations is a good chance to get some game time for these young players. And you're looking at some of the injuries that these teams are suffering with right now, and COVID problems. I mean, I can see a point where they go, right, we're going to suspend the under-19s and under-21s and just put them in training with the main squad and have them all as a main squad. And then you're going to have to look at the squad rules. There was a 15-year-old on the bench for Millwall yesterday. That's how desperate the squad depth is becoming now for teams, is they're putting in youth players. like 15, 16 years old onto their bench and starting them in games. But look, squad depth has been tested. We've had managers coming out saying that we tried to ask for games to be postponed because of COVID and the injuries are mounting up. Um, and this is a byproduct of having that all those international breaks, trying to shoehorn all these fixtures in, and with the World Cup being when it is, it's creating these consequences. And I have noticed injuries are up. There are more players out injured now than what there were 2 years ago. So the disrupted schedule we've had, and yeah, young Bellingham did come on for Birmingham City. Both Bellinghams scored, I believe, yesterday, which is something. Jude and Joe Bellingham both scored goals on the same day, which is good to see. But yeah, you look at some of these young players who are like 15, 16, 17 years old who are, basically being forced to play senior football before they're ready. I think, in my opinion, that is concerning. But you've got to look at the injuries and the amount of players missing, and then you whack in the Africa Cup of Nations, and then yeah, you've got squad problems, and there are rules now limiting squad sizes, which I think is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. It's not good. If we're discussing player welfare and we're discussing, looking after players, we're going to have some major fixture congestion and some major headaches come the end of this month, next month, and into March, April. We're going to have some major problems. There's going to be a lot of fixtures. They're going to have to try and shoehorn these fixtures in. And this is not the only league and not the only sport that's having these problems. And don't get me wrong, the NRL in Australia is going to have these problems come March. The Super League in February is going to have these problems. The NHL in North America is already having these problems. But here's the thing, yeah, it's some good first team experience and some good game time. And I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't even know who his name is, but some of these young players are going to get more game time this season because of injuries and because of suspensions and because of the COVID pandemic and because of the Africa Cup of Nations. Some of these young lads are going to get runs inside that they wouldn't otherwise get in a normal season. And that's a good thing. And it's possibly a bad thing, but it's a good thing as well. And then you can see how they're developing because they're the under 17s, under 19s, the youth teams are getting affected as well. And so they're getting, I think, first team minutes before I think they are ready, which is a problem. But we're going to see a lot more young players who are still teenagers. I mean, quite I'm 32, I feel old. Getting game time when in a normal season they wouldn't. And yeah, there's going to be some young players for Arsenal and Nottingham Forest today, playing. There's going to be a lot of young players for Liverpool playing today. And so it gives us a good idea of where player development is at. But at the same time, it is worrying that they are being forced to use like under 17s and under 18 players to fill in, squad holes, which shouldn't be there. But they've changed the squad size of squad limits, which is having a negative impact and a dangerous impact on player welfare and player health. Because I swear injuries are going up, and that's got to be a concern if you're a fan of a club and you've got so many players out. And I do go back to that Chesterfield Salford City game where 17 players were missing. There's a whole starting lineup plus matchday squad out injured between two teams. That is just shouldn't be happening. That should not be happening at any level of the game. So I think we're going to see more postponements because of lack of availability of players. Yes, they are considering expanding squad sizes so the Six Nations can be completed in full. I think they're looking at expanding squad sizes for the Six Nations and increasing them. How the domestic club sides feel about that, having to give up more players to the international game, is going to be interesting with rugby union. But the same debate's now being had in football: is the restrictive squad size rules in place are a reaction to clubs overspending for many years, trying to meet financial fair play regulations, which clubs aren't getting punished for because it's just will flout the rules. And even the big clubs are now running out of players, available players, and that has got to be a worry. Um, so we'll see what happens with the Six Nations. We're still like a month and a half out of that, so we'll see what happens when the Six Nations rolls around in February. What squad rules are in place for the Six Nations. We'll see what occurs with the rest of the season with the football, because the NHL was already on the back foot and they've already had to reintroduce the taxi squad. So if you follow the ice hockey, the NHL had to pause before Christmas, had to extend that pause after Christmas, and then they said we're bringing back the taxi squad. So um, yes, it is still on normal TV, BBC ITV. Amazon hasn't got their grubby hands on the Six Nations yet. Um, they had the Autumn Internationals, which pissed me off no end, and I wasn't happy about that. But I didn't. Then I looked back at my video history, and I did a video on Amazon getting rights to the Autumn Internationals, so I should have known that Amazon were going to have the rights. But that should be on BBC ITV. Um, but yes, squad size limits are being re-looked at because they're not sustainable. Uh, the amount of games where teams just cannot be fielded is ridiculous, and they have to ask for exemptions. If that was a normal season, they are forfeiting the match, 2 or 3-0, depending on league rules. But so many teams are like, we can't field a team, and we could end up in a position like Dover Athletic last year in the National League, where they just cannot fulfil their fixture list because of postponements, and it's going to get to that discussion point. And I think the FA, the Football League, and the Premier League would rather that didn't happen. So the FA are very insistent that the third round gets completed. All fixtures get completed. Whether that's the right way to go about it or not, your guess is as good as mine. Um, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what plays out. And I wasn't very happy that Amazon got those rights because I used to love watching the internationals, and there were some classic games that I missed out on. But it is what it is. I did enjoy watching the women's rugby though. That was refreshing to watch, and it was a nice change. Yeah, well, look, we'll see what happens with this winter break, hey, because they've got to get these fixtures played, and the amount of fixtures that need to be completed, it's going to be a nightmare. Um, and the World Cup being, yeah, it's going to be a fixture pile up. It's going to be a mess. And this is what happens when you have a World Cup in a desert. And yeah, and because the fixturing for next year is already up in the air, like it's going to be a nightmare. We're going to see what happens. We're going to see, how many more fixtures get postponed. I can see more postponements happening. I think some clubs are over the worst of their outbreaks. Other clubs are waiting to have their outbreaks. And then it becomes a whole nightmare in itself. But we'll see how it all plays out, and we'll see how many, if the FA can get all the FA Cup ties played. We know there's no more replays now from the third round onwards. So could that Barrow Ipswich game be the last replay we ever see ever in the FA Cup? That could be the last ever FA Cup replay, um, and that does impact the lower league and non-league clubs. Well, if that happens, that's going to be a massive nightmare because then it completely damages FIFA's idea for a 2-year World Cup cycle if that one gets cancelled, because they've already made the European and South American leagues have already made massive fixture adjustments to get the tournament played, and then you're going to have bigger problems, and then FIFA's going to have egg on their face. They have to play the tournament. They have no choice. They have to play the tournament. And FIFA have boxed themselves into a very bad corner where the tournament has to be played. So you couldn't make it up even if you tried. But there you go. And I'm going to leave that there. I've got bits and pieces to do. I've got to sort out some breakfast, and I've got to sort out the washing. Oh yeah, I've got to do housework as well. I'm not just a YouTuber. I actually have to get my work uniform ready for tomorrow. I've got so much to do. It's ridiculous, and it's what 5 to 12, and I've still got to have breakfast. I haven't had breakfast yet. But yeah, there's so much for me to do. And yeah, we'll see what we can do. But yeah, so I shall catch you guys with my match reviews later. And yes, I'll be watching. I don't know what game is the 2 o'clock kickoff they're showing on ITV before the Nottingham Forest Arsenal. So I'm going to be surprised with what game I watch, because it doesn't say on the TV guide, which is a pain in the arse. But yes, so we'll see what FA Cup games. What it is West Ham Leeds. That's going to be fun. I'm going to look forward to that West Ham Leeds. That's going to be a spicy encounter. Leeds are not playing well this season. West Ham are really in form, and so that's going to be a really, really fun game, I think. And if Leeds do turn up and give it a go, it could go to extra time. But I think West Ham are big favourites for this one. We'll see how it plays out. We'll see what Leeds team turn up, because they haven't performed this season. They've really struggled this season. And West Ham, I don't think they're performing above themselves. I think they're actually where they should be. They're playing really well. They've carried on the form from last season to this season. They're playing really well, and we'll see how many changes both sides make for this game. I hope they don't put weakened teams out. So we'll see. We'll see who comes out on top. But again, you've got to shoehorn these fixtures in. So midweek games are a thing. So we'll see if West Ham put out the strongest possible lineup, and we'll see what lineup Leeds put out, how strong their lineup is as well, because that's going to be really, really important. Because if both sides put weakened lineups out, it could be a bit of a dull affair. But I think West Ham are eyeing this competition for silverware. And I think David Moyes wants to actually win the FA Cup, considering he got there with Everton in the final and lost to Chelsea all those years ago. I think he wants to get that monkey off his back. So, and Leeds, we'll see how Leeds play. They need to get something going to get their season going, because they are not doing well this season. So we'll see. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all the questions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon with my match reviews of today's games. And of course, thank you very much for all your comments, all your questions, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon. Oh.